開けるんだ開くのさその不思議な扉を登れるんだ登るのさ未来に触れるその心炸裂の富の節消えてゆく皆の命愛してる女性に裏切られ白涙が宇宙にさまよその行方さえも知らぬただただ自由に漂う登れるな登るのさ未来に触れるその心今私の富のさ熱く燃える富のさ水の証富のさ敵を落とせ富のさ我らの富のさ
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman.
And Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to peer into the delightfully deranged mind of Tomino Yoshiyuki with our Tomino-THON. This week on the show is the beginning of the end of part one of our Tomino-THON, where we today are going to be going to a galaxy far, far away, where our story will begin on a desert planet with twin suns, where we'll meet a young man who, with his laser sword and his trusty friends at his side, will gather allies and go out into the world to fight against an oppressive empire who had wiped out the wonderful warrior legacy that he is heir to. That's right, today we are not talking about Star Wars, we are talking about heavy Metal L-Gaim, the sort of capper in some ways to the weird trilogy almost of shows that Tomino made in the 80s and the build-up to him making Zeta Gundam, and where we will split for our part one. We're specifically today talking about the first half of Heavy Metal L-Gaim, episodes 1 to 26. Basically everything covering the first theme song of the show. And this, Jonathan, is a weird show.
It's a weird show. It's a delightful show. I really like it. It's,
Yes.
It's an interesting run because it's, I think, Tomino's most episodic show of his serialized shows, if that makes
Yes.
sense. Like, other than, like, Daitarn is pretty much purely episodic, other than the very, very slight arcing around sort of the main character's family and all of that stuff, Haran Banjo, and what happens in the final episode. L-Gaim is, serialized. It does have a story that moves forward. It does have, things that matter from episode to episode. But it also does not really have stories that cross over from episode to episode. It's more rigidly episodic than Zabungle was, than Ideon was, than Dunbine was. But I think it's really good at what it's doing. Like, I don't think so far it necessarily reaches the highs that we saw in the first half of Zabungle or Dunbine, but I also think it has a level of consistency that I really enjoy. And I feel like it's maybe I'll eat my words next week. It feels like it's less likely to kind of go in a weird direction in the second half, the way both of those shows did. So we'll see, for good or for ill, whatever that might be. But I'm enjoying it. Great characters, great character designs and mecha designs. Oh my god, the music slays. It's a very fun watch.
Yes, yeah, that's very much my take as well. That I think it's a weird show as a Tomino show, because I think this is the show that, like, other than something like Daitarn 3, I think you feel Tomino's touch here the least. I mean, his touch is still very much here.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. Character names are fucking crazy. The dialogue is clearly often written by Tomino because it's just, you can just tell. It's got that kind of action touch to it. But it doesn't have so much of the, like, psychological realism of the characters. It doesn't have the same structure to the narrative that you kind of expect. And we'll get to this in the history where once I started looking deeper into how the show is made, it becomes a lot clearer about why that is the case. Because it is, I think, the show where he intentionally pulls back the most. And so it took a little bit for me to get kind of adjusted to that because it is so kind of differently structured than this other stuff. But what I think it makes up for in having, I think, a much less ambitious kind of narrative approach, it more than makes up for with its aesthetic approach. Because I think the aesthetic of the show is just wonderful. And it's it's just such a pleasurable thing to dive into. It's 80s as fuck. It's like, It's so incredibly 80s. We have been in this kind of soft transition period with Zabungle and Dunbine where they're still pretty 80s, but you feel it like, you see like Elchi's redesign is like, okay, we're jumping into 80s fashion. We're just starting to get there. And then, you have like Gerald in Dunbine also is that. And then here in L-Gaim, everybody's super 80s. Everyone has massive fucking hair. There are shoulder pads all over the place. You've got like sick synth stuff on the soundtrack. And a lot of like the music stuff is very city pop influenced. The mecha designs, which we'll get into all that, are just incredible. And the animation that realizes all those character designs and the mechas and all that is just exquisitely well done. And so as an aesthetic experience, I'm with you that I think it is just such a fun show to watch, even if there are stretches of the show where I kind of forget what the overall goal and what is the arc and how does these episodes kind of contribute to that bigger narrative picture. I think that is kind of gets lost in the weeds at certain points, but the episode to episode experience of L-Gaim I think is just an incredibly enjoyable thing. And I just constantly am, banging out to the fucking bass guitar and the sick tunes and just the crazy action shit that happens with lasers and lightsabers and shit flying all over the place. And for that aesthetic experience, you kind of can't get anything else that is quite like L-Gaim.
100%. And yeah, I really enjoyed our time with it so far. I'm excited to see more. I'm very curious to see how it's my biggest outstanding question going into the rest of the episodes we have to watch is how it will sustain itself over another 2 cores of anime. Because I don't know if I see it having that much juice yet, but I also think Tomino is one who can tap into deeper gears when and if he needs to, and there is a rich sort of story and world going on, even if I think the half we've seen so far hasn't delved all that deep into it because it sticks mostly episodic. But again, I will say, I think it's wildly consistent on the level of episode to episode. There's some I think are maybe less good than others. None so far I would say are bad. And it's just really fun. Honestly, it reminds me less of other Tomino shows in this era than other Sunrise shows in this era. It has so much dirty pair in it, so much dirty pair in it. Particularly there's an episode near the end of the batch we watched, I think it's 25, that is just a dirty pair episode, which is, yes, it's 25, because that's the one where Amu's old flame, Check, finds her, and it is just a dirty pair story with your hunk of the week, and he's got a connection to the girl who's the main character in the story, and all of that stuff, and then at the end, that episode also just becomes a Dragon Ball Z episode, complete with a replay of the Raditz Goku scene, where he's got, Goku has Raditz in the, chokehold. It's great. So, yeah, this show rocks. I'm excited to talk about it, and I'm excited to go watch more when we're done.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm kind of in Dunbine, I'm in a strange position where because I played Super Robot Wars Y, which features L-Gaim stuff and features a lot more L-Gaim stuff than Dunbine, I know things about the story and some of the characters, and I'm very curious of the second half, what is the context? Because that's one of the fun things for me was seeing the context for all these characters and the mechs and stuff like Gablet, for instance, is a very different character than I was expecting based on the snippets of him I saw, because I didn't realize he was going to be your kind of Team Rocket figure. But the show is intentionally setting him up as your Team Rocket. It's not the thing like the Black Knight in Dunbine where he just ends up in that role as a necessity. Here, the show is much more intentional about some of that stuff, but it has been very fun.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the consistency of it and that stuff, is that it does have, I think, a clarity of what it wants to be from the go. That means, so far at least, again, maybe it doesn't hit the highs of some of the stuff in Dunbine or Zabungle, but it also doesn't hit some of the problems where the show has an uneasy relationship with what it is and trying to be. And so there's stuff you can just enjoy Gavlet Gabale in a way that you can't Burn Bunnings by later in Dunbine.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah. It's a very interesting show because again, I was not expecting some of those elements, but once I got into it, it's pretty awesome. And this show has a fucking wild development history. That I went very into the weeds and found some fun interviews because Yeah, this show has basically two different development histories, depending on which person you're reading the interviews of Tomino, and then we'll get to Nagano Mamoru, who are two kind of like main people. That's one of the things that's fun about the show is that we have another big creative figure. This isn't really just a Tomino show, because many people consider it to be a Nagano Mamoru show more than a Tomino show in some ways. So let's get into that, see what is the history here.
So let's do episode 11 of Tomino-THON and episode 1 of Nagano-THON.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
What this is, right?
And yes, and then episode 2 of Nagano-THON will read like the 20 years of the 5-Star Stories manga that he's been making. We'll talk about what that fucking manga is next time. That dude has had a fucking crazy career. We're gonna save his post L-Gaim stuff and talk about some of that next week. But anyways, let's get into where all this starts, which is with Star Wars. As all anime post 1977 does, it's all about Star Wars. So as Mobile Suit Gundam was nearing its conclusion in December 1979, Tomino was conceptualizing a new series. He was kind of brainstorming various ideas. One of them was a heavily Star Wars-inspired idea called the Mugen Stars, or that would translate to the Infinite Stars in English. We know this because Tomino drew a large set of image boards, and these were in that kind of museum exhibit. So they were in the book I bought about the museum exhibit. And if you look through those image boards and you look at like the text he writes in them, it describes a lot of the basic setting and character details. Many of the kind of things change, but a lot of it is very similar to what ultimately carries through to L-Gaim. So, for instance, Mugen Stars features a binary star solar system. The first thing on the image board is Tomino doing his version of the iconic original Star Wars poster of the sexy Luke Skywalker with his robe half open and shoving the lightsaber in the air. He's kind of doing all that kind of stuff. We're on a binary star solar system like Tatooine. This one has 5 planets, which is ruled over by the Posaydal Empire. We have a hero who is named Daba, and he will lead the people of Tritatwal, which is the name for the 3rd planet that we visit. It's the last planet we visit now, so he carries that name through. He has a love interest called Feneria. He has a fated encounter with a woman named Kuasana Olivia, so he changed that name a little bit, while doing battle with his, in these image boards, female rival, who is named Gavalit Gabali. The aesthetic of these image boards is very clearly pulling from Star Wars if you look at them, but also not just Star Wars. He's like pulling from pulp sci-fi stuff in general. Like there's a lot of Buck Rogers in it as well. And so it's very clear from this kind of initial stage of him ideating this thing that he's interested in exploring this kind of pulp sci-fi fantasy setting, which is very different than the stuff we think of with Tomino, which is much more grounded military sci-fi, or he has that kind of philosophical speculative fiction edge to something like Space Runaway EDM. So I think it's really interesting at the end of Gundam, he's kind of toying with these two different, to me, very polar opposite interpretations of where to go with the genre following Mobile Suit Gundam.
And it's interesting because this is his second show that doesn't take place on Earth. Zabungle being the other one. I mean, Ideon doesn't get to Earth until late, but Earth is a planet in it. Zabungle is in a completely kind of Star Wars-esque, just different place, but Zabungle never goes to space. L-Gaim goes to space and is not our solar system, which is kind of fun to see. Also, when we got to the point in L-Gaim a couple episodes in where they go into space, I was like, oh my god, we haven't been to space in like 100 episods on Tomino-THON. Yes. And I was like so relieved. I'm like, we're back, because Tomino's really good at the space stuff, so it was fun to be back in space.
Absolutely. However, while he, was storyboarding, kind of coming up with these ideas for the Mugen Stars was not to be, he ends up making Ideon. He then gets jumped into the production of Zabungle, which I suspect is probably the reason why it took a very long time for him to come back to these ideas. Is he had he's making 5 fucking movies around this time. Like he's doing a lot of shit. So the Mugen Stars sits undeveloped for years as he's working on other stuff, though I do think it's interesting that you do see some of these echoes in other places, because as I commented on the Zabungle episode, Gavalit Gabale is a minor villain who is a woman early in Zabungle. And so and at that time I was like, oh wait, isn't this fucking that dude who I fought in Super Robot Wars? It's like, oh, it is. Little did I know that that name even predated that. And it goes all the way back to 1979 with this kind of aborted project he was working on.
Yeah, I knew we were going to see a Gavalit Gabale again in L-Gaim. I didn't realize it was going to be one of the 5 main characters who's in every single episode. So that was kind of fun.
Yes. But one thing I want to make note of here as well that I think is very important for L-Gaim is now that we're at the kind of midpoint of the 1980s, we are very much at this big shift in the whole entertainment industry, which affects anime as well. So throughout the early 80s, we see these changes that are, a lot driven by technological shifts. So the home video market, which began in the late 70s with VHS and Betamax, has started to become much more commonplace. And by 1983, while Tomino was working on Dunbine, the first anime OVA, Dallas, was released. So now you're starting to have projects that, as a proper OVA, which is an original video animation, right? A whole project created, designed just to be sold on the home video market. And so that is now just starting to become a thing. Similarly, the Famicom was released in Japan in July of 1983, which began changing the landscape for home entertainment. And so, we are going to see a lot more anime video games from this point on. And then we also have the Sony Walkman, which had its first model released in 1979, and that was changing the market for music. So we're now with the 1980s, this whole shift in the kind of home entertainment market has become a huge element. Until this point, the primary funding for most anime, particularly for something like a mecha show, came from toy merchandising. But these new avenues of home entertainment, of home video, television, cassette tapes, etc., allow for whole new markets for them to capitalize on. And for robot anime in particular, the market for models began declining by the end of 1983. So some of those toy sales and stuff were starting to go down. And the slow, agonizing death of toy company and a major Sunrise sponsor, Clover, which we talked about a lot last time with Dunbine, that indicated the shift in this market, that we need to start thinking about other ways that we are merchandising and making money off of these shows. So L-Gaim is a show that begins this shift for Sunrise. It is the first Sunrise anime to receive OVA adaptations. There are kind of 3 OVAs that are pseudo compilation things, but also have new bits on them. And then also L-Gaim is the first one to have a concurrent home video game released as well. Tomino was very much aware of these changes. So he was I think as we've seen on a lot of this stuff, he is not just sitting there looking at the creative side of things and ignoring everything else. Like we talked about, for instance, with Ideon, he was thinking a lot about designing the mechs that he helped design for Ideon from the Buff Clan, about how would these work as toys? How are these put together? With Dunbine, he was thinking a lot about, well, what if we make the mech smaller and then it will work better with the human-sized figurines you can sell with the mech? So Tomino, despite I think people having this idea of him being someone who's just working on the stories that are these crazy fucking stories that nobody knows how to sell, and he says fuck the rest of it, he is not an idiot. He is very much thinking about how do these things exist in a market. He is a pragmatic person, even if I think he's so kind of crazy in certain ways that I don't think he fully understands the way that his stuff will be received. But he is very interested in the market and the technology and the ways that these things get sold. And so he very intentionally setting out to make Heavy Metal L-Gaim differently. And one of those big changes is he intentionally sets out to bring up a very wide range of younger staff to work on the show in much more prominent positions. A lot of them are people who worked on Dunbine, and then he kind of moves them up to instead of you doing just animation, now you're an animation director, right? And so he's moving up lots of young people. So for instance, there are lots of people in their early to mid 20s who are in roles such as animation director. So we've got Katazume Hiroyuki. He would go on to be the character designer for Double Zeta Gundam. And then you also have Omori Hidetoshi, who is a major animator now in the industry. He was one of the other animation directors on L-Gaim. And this guy, if you look up his credits, he works on dozens of projects every year. So there is a very intentional move by Tomino to work with particularly the animators and the young staff at Studio Bibo, the Kogawa Tomonoi studio that has worked on all these shows, and move them up the ladder thinking about this next generation, because he is seeing this whole generational shift both in the people working on these shows. This is the generation of Anos, of people who are starting to grow up having watched anime, who are entering the industry, but also he's seeing how that affects the whole market and the technology of how people consume these shows. And so that's very much a part of what happens with Heavy Metal L-Gaim.
And obviously something that matters for the future of Sunrise, too. That, Sunrise did not, as much as Tomino dominates a lot of Sunrise, it did not become a, single creator studio or something, because they're able to, foster all this talent that would really come into play in the later 80s and 90s when they really expand beyond some of this stuff, which is awesome.
Yes, and the most important person to talk about in the sense of him bringing up young people is Nagano Mamoru. So let's talk about Nagano Mamoru, who is the character and mechanical designer for this show, and then also goes on to be a very important mechanical designer and character designer in lots of shows, and also this big mangaka and all this stuff. We've talked about him before because he was the future husband to actress Kawamura Maria. He was the Char cosplayer at the declaration of the new era of anime, who helped read that out, and just that whole, weird relationship, and this whole, like, Tomino's like a part of their family almost. He's that guy. And so first his, I think he was probably dating Kawamoto Maria at this point. I don't know. They weren't married yet at this point. But first Tomino brings Kawamoto Maria in, makes her Cham Fao, and then now he's like, now I got to get this guy. And bring this guy in. But the whole story of how Nagano gets hired and gets onto these projects is fucking crazy. I want to just everyone keep in mind that everything I'm about to talk about is stuff that happens within the course of about 1 year. It's fucking crazy.
A year when Nagano Mamoru is 23.
Yes.
Also, yeah.
So he's 23 years old. He was hired by Sunrise in 1983, basically by fluke. He had been asked to attend an Ideon event for one of the Ideon movies as a cosplayer through his connections with his Gundam fan group, which is also the fan group that was at that declaration of the new era of anime. And one of his friends, as part of that group, mentioned to a producer from Sunrise that Nagano was an artist. Following the success of Macross, which was another show that featured a very large amount of young staff and like character designers and stuff like that, Sunrise was also looking for new talent, seeing there's kind of a new generation coming up. But Nagano, who at this point had no experience drawing anime characters or mecha or any of that side of stuff, he brought a portfolio of his own art, which included things like realistic architectural drawings, more like realistic drawings of machines. Like he was an art student, and so he brings that kind of art portfolio. And he was hired after being told, quote, "We can't use your pictures, but your personal history is interesting, so you're hired." Which is an amazing thing to be told. It's like, your whole fucking weird cosplay, like this whole thing is fucking crazy. Why not? Like, come on in. We can't, like, I'm sure his drawings were impressive, but obviously not the kinds of things that you could use in an anime production. So like, come on. So he was hired on January 1st, 1983, and 1984, and quickly began learning the ropes while working on pre-production for Galactic Drifter Vifam, where he was effectively a production assistant on that show. He touched most parts of the production, kind of like a gopher was kind of what it was implied to me in reading the interview. Some of his mecha designs ended up being accepted after a certain point on the show because they were just asking people, like, we need new mechas every single episode, like, send in designs, and some of those got pulled up. And then between April and June, he also began assisting with the production of Giant Gorg, which is a great show, which was directed by the man, the myth, the legend, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. And Nagano has a whole anecdote about this sequence of events in working under Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, which, as a recap, he's the character designer on the original Mobile Suit Gundam and one of the most important animators in the whole industry. One of like the key people behind Yamato, all that kind of stuff. So if you're going to work under someone to kind of learn the ropes, this is the kind of guy you want to work under. So Nagano says, while I was told to work on Vifam smoothly, I was also needed to work for all the other studios. However, not long after this, Giant Gorg started under the direction of Yoshikazu Yasuhiko. That meant a famous animator was making Giant Gorg. But in order to do that, Yasuhiko needed someone who was knowledgeable about weaponry and mecha. So he asked about this to pretty much everyone in the company, and they answered that there was someone who just joined, and I was brought in front of Yasuhiko in the 4th studio. We spoke, and Yasuhiko would show me the picture of Gorg and ask me if I understood this, and I said, yes. I also wanted to be looked upon kindly, and I told him, and this is a very 23-year-old thing to say, I told him, there is no one more knowledgeable than I am about these matters, is a great thing for a 23-year-old person to say when they're being asked something at their job. The Yasuhiko asked me a few questions on how would a vehicle like this move and what does it do. I seem to have answered these correctly, and he then offered me work on the project, specifically to work on things like a tank. At this point, I had to explain that I was expected to work on Vifam, but the company explained that because Yasuhiko was so important, they couldn't neglect his request. That meant I had to do both, as in work on Vifam and Giant Gorg. Well, what Yasuhiko needed for Giant Gorg was that he wasn't looking for someone who could just draw weapons, helicopters, and other hardware. What he wanted to know was what was happening inside of the machine, specifically in the case of the large tank-type vehicle called the Beagle, which in Giant Gorg, the Beagle is like the equivalent of the White Base. It's like a major setting for most of the show. So things like, how does it work? How does the engine function? How would it be driven? These kinds of details were what Yasuhiko wanted. In short, he wanted to know how would something work and how could it be used. With all this knowledge I had on these matters, I came up with how all this would work and function, so I drew all the inside detail of the Beagle. And I think this is a hugely revealing quote to why Nagano Mamoru's style is like really revolutionary and why someone like Yasuhiko would pull him up, is that it is not just about the external appearance. He thinks through the internals of everything and then builds them from out. And that's kind of what he's detailing here of what Yasuhiko pulled him for on Giant Gorg.
Yeah, makes sense because we'll get to it, but one of my favorite things about L-Gaim is it has the coolest idea of what is inside a mech of any mecha show I've ever seen, with the way that the bicycle basically docks into the mech, all of that. So we'll talk about it later. He's the first one who gets to the 360-degree cockpit idea, all of that stuff. It's so cool.
Yes. And I do have to say, if you're a young person out there and you're very ambitious and you want like a promotion at your job, if someone asks you if you can do something, you should tell them there is no one more knowledgeable than I am about these matters. It's so good.
Lie on your resume. Look, there's no downside. You know, if you get the job and you really can't do it, they'll fire you, and then you can lie on a resume for a different job. It's fine.
Exactly. So that's how he ended up on Giant Gorg. Simultaneous to all of this, Nagano also participated in an internal competition at Sunrise to design the Billbine for Or Battler Dunbine. Tomino had looked through a portfolio of over 50 of Nagano's drawings and had personally asked for his participation. Although Nagano's design wasn't used, Tomino was quoted as saying, quote, "We need to pick up geniuses like Nagano." And really, as far as I know, this internal competition thing was not actually a thing to actually get a design for the Billbine. Kogawa Tomonori, the character designer for Dunbine, did the design for the Billbine. I'm fairly certain that Tomino was just doing that to kind of survey who the more promising artists were at Sunrise to figure out who's going to work on his next project. Because I think I didn't pull this quote, but there's a later quote at the front of this big Nagano interview where he's like, and I learned later that they just used Kogawa's design. I'm like, why did they even do this competition? I'm like, I think they did it because he wanted to see who these other young artists were. I don't think he was actually trying to get a new designer for the show. He had a very good one right there already working on it.
Also, by the time you're working on the Billbine, you're halfway through Dunbine, you'd be thinking about what the next show is.
Yes.
So, like, clearly Tomino is looking ahead to who do I work with next time, because he's doing a show every year.
Yeah, and you know, behind the scenes, I'm almost 100% certain that Tomino was already at that point starting to work on bringing back the Mugen Stars as a new project called Spiral Flow, which we'll talk about in a second here. So yes, like the timeline of this is he's very much working on what's going to become his next show. Around June of 1983, Sunrise was beginning to look for Sunrise Studio 3's next show after Galactic Drifter Vifam finished. Nagano was told, quote, "Try to come up with a mecha, the likes of which no one has seen." When he responded, "Should I only make the mecha?" he was told the planning, the story, everything. Nagano then began planning a series heavily inspired by Star Wars, which featured a man and woman traveling with their giant mech. In July, Nagano presented this pitch to Bandai, and it was given the go-ahead with a temporary title, Explorer. However, in August of 1983, the ill-fortuned toy company Clover shuffled off this mortal coil, and Bandai took over sponsorship duties for Or Battler Dunbine. This led to a dramatic shift of production behind the scenes, as Bandai was now sponsoring Studio 2's new show instead of Studio 4's new show, and while the pitch for Explorer was for it to be a Studio 3 production, staff were shuffling around, and Nagano was pulled off of Vamfime and Gorg and was moved to Studio 2. So the death of Clover just caused all this, like, okay, which studio is working on what and who's sponsoring what, and so people were getting moved around internally while Nagano was in a corner drawing his little shit for this, like, show that maybe would get made. So Nagano began the process of refining and developing this planned project of Explorer, including he was creating drawings and designs for merchandise. In one of the quotes in the interview, he was talking about how at this point he was designing what was the bat shoe ultimately in L-Gaim, so he was creating the mechs that would ultimately be basically used on what becomes Heavy Metal L-Gaim. And the producers were searching for a director and other staff to try to work on this project. In September, it was determined that Tomino would be the one to ultimately direct Studio 2's next project, and Tomino at this point was developing his own thing called Spiral Flow, which he was basing on his earlier notes for the Mugen Stars. Tomino had been interested in Nagano's art and was obviously eager to foster new talent. This was part of his kind of mission statement for his show, and he wanted Nagano to do the mechanical designs. So Nagano was brought in, and in effect what happens is you have these two things, this kind of experimental project called Explorer that Nagano is working on, and this thing that Tomino was 100% going to make, that at that point was called Spiral Flow, and those two things fused together, creating what we now know as Heavy Metal L-Gaim. And basically, which person's interview you read, Tomino's stuff or Nagano's stuff, you get two very different ideas of what was the fundamental basis of the project. From Nagano's perspective, he's like, I was making all the fucking mechs, I was coming up with all this crazy shit, And then they said, and Tomino's going to direct the show. And Tomino comes in, and then, but like from his perspective, Explorer is the fundamental basis of it. From Tomino's perspective, it's, I'm making my new show. I pulled out these image boards. We'll get into, I'm getting a like book written. We'll talk about how like the writing process happened. And like, I'm going to make all the stuff. And then I saw this promising young dude in the corner who's this artist. I'm like, I want that guy on my project. And he comes in and turns Spiral Flow into Heavy Metal L-Gaim. And so I find it very funny that I was doing the research. Depending on whose interview you're looking at, you're getting such a different perspective on where this project comes from. So my conclusion is that it is your Dragon Ball Z fusion dance, and it ends up as Heavy Metal L-Gaim, and it's pulling substantial elements from both productions.
Which I think you can feel. I think those two mission statements you can kind of feel at work here, but in a very complimentary fashion. Including, like, this is something I noted in the crew notes later down, Sean, but just, like, the fact that Nagano is someone who would have been a child when Star Wars came out versus
Yes.
Tomino, who would have been an adult. I think, like, the influence of Star Wars on the art here, you just feel in a very different way than we've seen Tomino use Star Wars on, like, Gundam and stuff, because it's different when you're an adult who sees a big movie versus a kid who grows up with that movie as an influence. And I think that's the kind of spaces where you see some of these different hands on the show.
Absolutely. And I do have a very great, kind of very long quote from this interview from Nagano about this period of time, where he says, "The thing was that I had actually known Tomino for a long time by this point, because back when I was doing all that Gundam cosplay and helped with all those events, I met Tomino around that time as well. However, the moment Tomino came on to direct, it meant that this would now be a project for the second studio, and that caused all sorts of mayhem. The upside was that this was now going to be a follow-on mecha work from Tomino, so everything went ahead with that. I think how Tomino and I previously knew each other was unusual and unique, really. When I met him for the first time at work, yeah, it was unusual. So the director and the designer, or the boss and his staff, but it was also a different relationship compared to other people. I'd say now, after all this time, that we really respected one another. It was a very good relationship. Tomino had this capacity that he could really pull up people who had done nothing before and then value them, and that consider them as someone who could draw in a way nobody else could. That was quite special, I thought. In a way, directors Tomino, Yasuhiko, and Kanda, who's the director for Vaifan, are very respected, but somewhat feared because they were such a force within the industry. In my case, they really treated me like just another human being, always respectful. In that regard, they showed their true face, I felt." And this last quote I fucking love, because I just think it says a lot about the anime industry at this point. He says, "Producer Yamauda later explained why everyone was kind to me, and he explained that there was no one in the anime industry during that time who could hold a conversation and greet properly. It was always mayhem, with people doing all sorts of things simultaneously. It was very friendly, obviously. However, in this busy environment, I would greet someone and say, 'Excuse me,' and be polite. Apparently that made a very good impression." Which I just love this, like, nobody could fucking hold a conversation, nobody could greet someone like a regular human being, and I was just like, "Excuse me," and I was just nice. And I guess people liked me.
That's awesome. And, you know, that whole anecdote also, I think, speaks to, you know, we've traced since the beginning of this season some of the differences between Tomino and Hayao Miyazaki, because it's just a fun comparison. They were born the same year. Tomino often talks about Miyazaki as kind of a rival, that sort of thing. But I think one major difference is Tomino, throughout his career, was much better at finding young talent, fostering it, and, like, really elevating it on his stuff. Whereas Miyazaki's career is littered with cases where he tried doing that and then became a control freak and took the project over, and that person had to go do something else. And often became big. That's what happened to Hosoda Mamoru on Howl's Moving Castle, but, like, not because of their relationship with Miyazaki, which is, like, part of the reason why Sunrise is still a thing and Studio Ghibli is not. At least, I mean, Studio Ghibli exists, but you know what I mean. Like, this is a difference in personality that speaks to some good things Tomino has done. Not that Tomino is not prickly in other, you know, plenty of ways, but yeah, it's an interesting comparison.
I think it's also where you can see why Tomino, you know, is very much in the world of television and Miyazaki's in the world of movies, because I think it's like part of the job of being a showrunner in television is doing what Tomino's doing here and finding talented people, lifting them up, helping them get better, because they're going to be part of this company continuing to work on projects all the time. Whereas for Miyazaki, it's his movies are defined entirely from his vision, and like and Studio Ghibli is not going to work on something if it's not either him or, obviously back when Takahata was alive, Takahata was directing, right? You've got a very small number of people who could possibly be leading a project at a place like Studio Ghibli.
Right, and it's you're exactly right, because Tomino, we talked about back with Triton of the Sea, he had that on his first show experience of trying to be a control freak on everything. This is also true of Miyazaki's earliest directorial things. One of them found out how to not do that on future stuff and stayed in TV. One of them was like, no, I'm never letting go ever. And movies are an easier place to do that, because on a movie, you can touch every frame of the thing. It's hard, but you can. On a TV show, it's impossible. So it does speak to that difference.
Absolutely. Moving back into the history, because Nagano was not just the mechanical designer that Tomino brought in. There's something else here. So Nagano was brought in, for the mechanical design stuff, and Tomino at that point was looking for someone to serve as character designer on the show. And I love that this is an anecdote that both Tomino and Nagano in the two interviews I saw tell almost exactly the same. Tomino reportedly was troubled by finding someone who could design characters that matched the radical design of Nagano's mechs. Because keep in mind, like they look a little bit more conventional from our perspective because they're very influential. But at the time, if you're looking at everything leading up to L-Gaim, these are fun. It's just like a totally different ethos and kind of perspective on how to design these things. So Tomino's like, how the fuck do we get characters that fit in the same world as these mechs? And he offhandedly mentioned to Nagano, if only you could do the characters too. And then Nagano, again, just really good at self-advertising, immediately replied, I can do characters too. And so Tomino was intrigued by this idea, but he had to fight resistance because, not only is it highly, incredibly unusual for one person to do both character design and mecha design, especially as, the chief one on either side. You might get, Kogawa Tominori doing one or two designs for Dunbind, but you're not going to have him do both fully. But also keep in mind, Tagano was still only 23 and he had not been working for Sunrise for an entire year yet at this point. This is still within his first year of employment at the studio, his first year of working in anime is I'm going to have this kid do both character design and mecha design on the next Tomino show. And so Tomino obviously received a lot of criticism and pushback when he tried to do this. One quote that I thought is a very telling quote was someone saying, creating a project is not the same as educating the youth. Basically, that what Tomino is doing is just trying to sort of educate people and not trying to make a product for the company. However, Tomino ultimately was able to win out. He's nothing if not fucking stubborn and able to get his way when he wants to. And so Nagano did ultimately end up as both mechanical and character designer of Heavy Metal L-Gaim when he was 23 during his first year working in the industry and at Sunrise specifically. Fucking crazy.
This is real Yamada Naoko shit from KyoAni, right? This is nuts. And you know what? Tomino, 100% right, because this has far and away the best character and mecha designs of any Tomino show other than Gundam. Especially of everything we've watched so far. We'll get into Zeta Gundam stuff in the next half of the season, but of everything up through now, this is a home run unlike anything else other than Yasuhiko and, why am I forgetting his name? Odawara, right? What's his name? The mechanical designer?
Okawara Kunio?
Yeah, Kunio Okawara's work on Gundam. This is so fucking good.
And that's two different people do this.
That's two different people, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because here with Nagano, let me read the next little bullet point here. Then I think we can talk a little bit maybe just about Nagano's art and stuff, because this is the main part for Nagano's part of the history. So Nagano's design process for the series at this point, he's doing both incredibly thorough. I think you cannot understate the amount of impact he has on Heavy Metal L-Gaim as a show. He created highly detailed and elaborate setting details and embedded them in the design. So he's participating not just in the design work for characters and the mechas, but also for the story and the world and stuff like that. His design process involved developing elements from the ground up or from within to without, even if details would never be shown, such as you can see in his character designs. If you look at the character design sheets, he develops the underwear for the characters. Each character has a unique pair of underwear. Daba basically has tidy whities, but he thinks about that for his character designs. And so he's incorporating those. And this approach is most obvious with the mechs themselves, which have elaborate internal machinery of wires and pistons that are covered with a metallic exoskeleton, a design ethos basically not seen in the industry up to that point, but would prove massively influential from this point forward, including in various Gundam shows. And so Nagano had a substantial influence on various setting and story details as the series progressed, as one of the chief creatives for the show. And I do think it's just, especially having watched these things in sequence, I think it is it's just so clear how revolutionary the design is for the heavy metals. And not just that it's revolutionary, but that I think beat for beat, these are the best or some of the best mechs I've seen in anything. I kind of felt this way watching Super Robot Wars, but it's a different, or playing Super Robot Wars, it's a different experience watching the show and seeing them in the proper context. That some of them, like the L-Gaim itself, the Bachu, particularly the Algae, which is Ney Mohan's one, the big gold one, are just such incredible designs that are so fully realized. And this idea of you're not looking at the mech as just a sort of external, basically like a character. Like if you think the way that like the original Gundam is drawn versus the stuff we will see in Zeta Gundam, because Nagano is one of the designers who works on Zeta Gundam, you look at the original Gundam and it's like a whole piece. It almost, it looks like, a person wearing a complete suit of armor. It does not look like a complex piece of machinery with internal mechanics that make that machine function. And when we get to Zeta Gundam, even stuff like the Gundam Mark II, I think you can already see that influence of having boosters and stuff on the legs that reveal in the gaps the circuitry and the pistons and the oil and the wires and everything that builds it as a giant machine and not as a big knight in shining armor, which is what the idea goes back to all the way to like Mazinger Z, is like a big knight in armor, basically. And so I think that Nagano's whole idea here of how he designs them and the thoroughness with which it is executed, and then also, the Sunrise and Studio Bibo animators who can execute that on screen is just fucking incredible. They show it off even just like the first episode where, one of the wires in his legs gets cut and the oil starts spilling out and it affects the functionality of the machine. It's such a fully integrated thing into the world of the show. It is, I think, just an absolutely remarkable achievement that obviously had a massive, massive influence on this whole genre going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, my main feeling, getting into L-Gaim after watching everything we've watched in order so far was this sense of almost like coming home. It was like, not only was I very impressed, but also felt like, oh, right, okay, this is what mecha anime looks like. Because to this day, this is the birth of like this kind of design language. And, other than Gundam 79, which I think has some of the most phenomenal mecha designs of all time, and like obviously they're of their time in the ways you're describing, but are the perfect best ones of their time, everything else we've watched this season, from Zambot to Daitarn, to Zabungal and on, some of them have had really good mech designs. Some of them have had, I think, less good ones. I think the Daitarn is an example of one that I don't really like that design. The Ideon is a bad design, except in the context of Space Runaway Ideon, where it becomes great because of the story being told. Zabungal and Dunbine, I think, have some really good, cool designs. I like the, bug insectoid language of Dunbine. But there's also a lot of just, throwaway designs on those shows that you don't really think much about. There's a lot of, I think, throughout all of these series, there's a lot of awkward designs that don't feel like they, necessarily go anywhere. And so there's this kind of muddled aspect where there is this dated quality to watching mecha shows pre-Heavy Metal L-Gaim. And then you start episode 1 of L-Gaim, and just from the theme song, you can tell, oh my god, these are the coolest fucking mechs. And if you're someone like us who has this experience with later Gundam and other Pat Labor, I also think takes a lot from, and obviously, from this, anything later 80s into the 90s, you just can see how much, the L-Gaim itself feels like a demarcation point where, Heavy Metal L-Gaim episode 1 airs 1 week after, Aura Battler Dunbine episode 49, but it feels like a different era has arrived in the design of these things. And it is incredible to behold, both for the design aspects, but then, as you say, Sean, the animation on this show is just extraordinary. I would say Dunbine is more distinguished by its backgrounds and art direction and that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about the character animation layer and the mech animation layer, L-Gaim is a cut above. And there is so much cool stuff going on here. And I think it's the last one we're watching today, episode 26, the final battle in that episode, it's this 4-way battle between Gavle, Daba, Hashimosha, and Leshy. And there's a shot in there that is this. It's not a 3D shot in the way today we would say an UFO table 3D shot that is able to use CGI, but it is 3D drawn to look like that as it does this camera shift around the mechs as one of them rips apart out of another one. And it's moments like that that make my jaw drop. It looks like it's out of a movie. And part of how they're able to do that is because the design is so detailed in those 3 dimensions. What is under the hood of that thing is so well thought out that you will consistently have moments like that that just kind of take your breath away. And it is just astonishing, again, in sequence to go, right, this is just 1 year later, but it feels like a whole new era.
Yeah, and again, and some of that is the mecha design, and then the other part of it is the character designs as well, which part of it is like you just get the sense of that, like, time has moved on, right? And we are entered a whole new era of aesthetics. And Nagano was very, interested and passionate about fashion. And I think that really comes across in his designs as well, because you just look at, particularly for me, like some of my favorites are like Nemohan. I think just like what a fucking incredible. As soon as I saw that character in Super Robot Wars, I'm like, holy shit, I need to watch this show and see what this lady's whole deal is. But like Gavlet obviously has an incredible one, like Oldna Posaydal, Amandra Commandra. And then also the main characters, like Fenelia and Daba and them don't have as eccentric as some of the bad guys do, because they have to animate them every episode all the time. So you probably want to keep Daba a little bit more simple. But the characters are so readable and their personalities come out in their fashion so clearly. And Daba's like sort of simple aesthetic he's got and the kind of simple clothes that he wears feels like it comes very naturally from the kind of guy that he is. And I just think that the way these characters look, their hairstyle, their fashion, all of it is so incredible. It has that fantastic 80s touch, but it also is so like internally consistent. It's so reflective of the personality of these characters. Like Gablet's, very flamboyant, and he's very, he's very extra. So he's got a fucking cape, and he's got his massive cod piece that animators love to frame certain shots to like put right in the center of the frame. It's just that element of it also makes it feel so modern. And I love all the character designs that Koga Tominori did for Zabungle and Dunbine. It's just that feels like we've made such a big step stylistically. And I think it's just something you could only get when you have someone who's part of a new generation working on the show.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that, like, you're talking about fashion stuff. He would just, we know this being in our 30s now, Nagano being 23 would be much more in touch with, like, what are people wearing today than Tomino and the other, like, not that Tomino's old at this point, but the other, kind of senior leaders at Sunrise would be. And yeah, that comes through. I think it's something that makes the, like, Team Rocket quality of Gavlet more entertaining than, like, the repetitive nature of someone like Timp Sharon in Zabungle or Byrne Bunnings, the Black Knight in Dunbine, is the clothing and the design can be so much more expressive. There's something about that like, and I obviously enjoy those characters in certain parts, but by the end of those shows, they get pretty, nothing happens with them. But even if nothing ultimately happens with Gablet, I'm always down to just see how he's going to wear that fucking cape and that cod piece and move that beautiful purple hair around.
Yeah.
And Nemohan looks like she just got out of, doing a spin class. It's great. It's just, and yeah, it is 80s as fuck. It is the most 80s of Tomino's 80s stuff, because Zeta and Double Zeta are very 80s in a lot of ways, but not as much, because they're more in kind of that overall Gundam aesthetic. But this one just gets to let its 80s freak flag fly, and oh my god, it is like Top Gun levels of this could only be made in the 1980s.
Yeah, it is absolutely fantastic. So let's continue on with the history section here and get into the Tomino side of the story of how he had the show put together, which involves another creator here. So for the main story itself, this is taking a step back before Nagano joined. Tomino took an unprecedented move for one of his shows. He had somebody else write it. It's like, this is one place where he's never really let go, and he tried letting go here. Tomino asked writer Watanabe Yuji, whom we have seen his credit a lot. He worked very heavily on Ideon and Dunbine. And he asked him to serve as the series composer role for the show, which is a totally normal credit to have. It was not as expected at this point in the industry, but it was still a super common kind of thing. But Tomino had never done it. For one of the shows that he led, every Tomino show that he directed up until this point had employed a system where Tomino created the fundamental story outlines, right? We detailed this in a lot of detail with the Gundam one, because there's a lot of documentation about it specifically for Gundam. And so you'd create those story outlines, and then he would have a group of 5 to 6 writers would approach and adapt those story outlines into episodes. And then Tomino would go back and, for some of those episodes, completely rewrite the episode again, much to the chagrin of some of the writers on shows like Gundam. For L-Gaim, Tomino, again, he wanted to try to take a different approach, and so he asked Watanabe Yuji to write a novel, effectively as a setting, and using the setting and character details from his The Mugen Stars project that he had all this material he had drawn up and kind of designed for, but had never gone anywhere. His only other requests for Watanabe were to include a character called Lilith Fao, who would be a character based on Cham Fao from Or Battler Dunbine, and to, I love this, quote, include a youthful energy like the works of Murakami Haruki, which of all the names I expected to come up in researching L-Gaim, I did expect Murakami Haruki to get dropped, but keep in mind that at this point, he was very much an up-and-coming writer. He was not the heavy-hitting canonical author you think of today. It's one of the most popular authors of magical realism. He was still very early in his career. And so it makes sense that you would say youthful energy like Murakami Haruki, because when you say that, it's a radical energy like him, yes, I wouldn't describe his energy as youthful in a modern context.
No, he's a literary institution now. He's won
exactly.
a Pulitzer, stuff like that, right? It's you can't say that about him anymore, but it is funny to hear that of oh, right, at some point, every author is a new author with a youthful energy.
Yes.
Yeah,
and it just was such a, because I was reading this detail came from a source I was reading in Japanese, and I had to double check 3 times. They mean that one, right? They mean that Murakami Haruki, because he's obviously very popular in Japan, but he's such an internationally known author. I just was okay, crazy. I taught a Murakami Haruki story last semester at school. He's that kind of author. He's in the textbook we teach from that we can teach from. But anyway, so that were sort of some of the requests that Tomino had for Watanabe. Gave him these materials, said put a weird fairy girl in it that looks like Cham, and read some of this Murakami Haruki stuff. And so Watanabe began working on the novel to kind of serve as a basis for the show, but the project was selected to be the successor show to Dunbine, meaning the production had to be accelerated much faster than Tomino originally expected, and so the novel was not completed by the time that production started. Ultimately, Watanabe would work on, complete, and edit, revise the novels during the production, and the novels were released in 3 volumes in 1985. So this is one of those shows that does have novels but are not written by Tomino. The process of creating the story of L-Gaim as production progressed proved to be a complicated and stressful process for all involved. Much of Watanabe's initial ideas for the series rapidly changed in the process of creating the storyboards for individual episodes. Some notable changes were things like Gao Haleshi becoming a rival love interest, which was not in the original thing that Watanabe described. Gable becoming a much more comedic character, which was not the case in the original designs. More dramatically, Watanabe's overall vision of the story, which ultimately involved Daba being pulled between 2 competing philosophies represented by the 2 pseudo-immortal characters in the series, Lilith the fairy and Posaydal, who is Oldna Posaydal, and one has a philosophy of control, the other has a philosophy of freedom, and that Daba would be pulled between them. That was basically abandoned at an early stage. Now, I don't know if some elements of that will come up in the second half of the show. I have no idea, but clearly that is not a thing that the show is doing right now, because Lilith is not in anywhere near that kind of important role. So clearly, Watanabe's kind of overall vision for what the story would be was basically abandoned in large stretches. As these changes mounted up, Watanabe began to resent the process, and has stated later in life that he considers his novels to be, quote, the official version to him personally. Later on, in response to a question about the changes to the story in L-Gaim, Tomino said, quote, anyone who has read Watanabe-san's novel would surely have this question, so let me make what happened very clear. What I asked from Watanabe-san, the novel, came from a desire to have someone outside the specialty of animation as part of the core staff. However, when it came to trying to forcibly set in stone the direction of the series at the stage of animation, it became inevitable that the story would be altered. When that process began, it became clear that Watanabe-san was inexperienced in animation, and it came back to bite us. I can only say this now, but there's no way that process would go well, but I had an arrogance at the time where I tried to force it through. That production continuing as it did exposed the delusion that I could create the show alone. Watanabe had a response on this issue as well. It was kind of part of the same series of interviews, so he's kind of half responding to Tomino's comment there. He said, quote, a TV series is built by the director, scenario writer, and inshutsu. I don't know how it's hard to translate that word because I don't want to just say director again, but like episode director, that kind of thing. Working together to build the story. But as mentioned by Tomino-san at that time, we all became disconnected partway through. I think that was a failure. On the bright side, it ended up as a massive collection of each of our uninhibited expressions, but I can say as the person meant to control the direction of the series, it ended up as a totally different story. And so this is another place where I think you can really tell, even in this first half. I'm curious to see in the second half if some of the other elements here will be more apparent. But I think you can kind of tell that the show maybe early on had an idea of a bigger story it wanted to build to, and then it kind of lets that go at a certain point. And I think this thing that Watanabe says of, on the bright side, it ended up as a massive collection of each of our uninhibited expressions, meaning like, he has Watanabe has a bunch of his ideas that are in there. Tomino has a bunch of his ideas that are in there. Nagano has a bunch of his ideas that are in there, and probably other members of the production also do. But there's not a unifying vision and a unifying force that are wrangling all those ideas together into one cohesive overall storyline. And I definitely think that is true of the show. I don't think it's a huge negative because of the way the show is. But there's something about like reading this that it kind of helped put into perspective for me why the story feels so different from most Tomino productions, because it simply doesn't have that kind of hardcore Tomino, like, this is what I want it to be. I might change what I want it to be halfway through and put all this new type shit in there, whatever. But like Tomino has his like very clear ideas for like the story and characters, and he clearly pulled back really substantially on that in the production. And as he says here, that he ultimately was not able to, in his opinion, be able to let go enough and allow, like, sort of like manage what Watanabe's vision was and other people's visions well enough to have it kind of function the way that he really ultimately wanted it to. But I think that like this whole kind of process of writing the show is very interesting because it's just different from anything Tomino did up to this point. And as far as I know, we haven't done the detailed research on everything after this point, but I don't think he ever does something like this again.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're getting near. I mean, this is his last 50-episode show that is not Gundam. So we know what all his other 50-episode shows are. Yeah. But no, it's interesting because the first core or so of this show has more of an overarching plot. Yeah. I still think it's pretty episodic, even, like, and obviously Tomino shows always have a fairly, like, episodic structure in terms of how they build the story within each 20-minute, stretch. But you still have that, but you do build to the big reveal of Posaydal as a character. You have the reveal of Daba's backstory, and you have Daba kind of choosing this goal in conjunction with Stella Koban and the rebel group that he's going to lead the rebels, and they're going to go out and find more rebels. But then the second core of the show, that is still nominally their goal. They just don't make a lot of progress in it episode to episode. It doesn't bother me so far. It's something they could definitely pick up. I'm curious to see where all that goes in the second half. It never feels like they've dropped it or that like the design of the show has like completely changed in the way that like, Dunbine has a very hard shift, right? When they go back to Upper Earth, right? Like, there's nothing like that going on here. But it is interesting to see kind of where that energy changes a little bit.
Yeah, and I think kind of like the thing that happens with the show is that the status quo becomes a little vague, at a certain point. Like, at a certain point, like, it feels like kind of all of a sudden we're all on a ship, like, obviously, like, you have the episode where it comes in with Amu and stuff, but now it's like, oh, now we're in space and we're on a ship, and Gavlet has his ship now, and it kind of feels like the status quo sort of changed, but it didn't feel like the show, it feels like the show stumbled into some of the status quo shifts, and it's just like, I guess this is what we're doing for a while. And you just don't feel like there's a really strong hand on the wheel guiding the storyline through its episodic arcs. It feels like it's really kind of stepped back. But again, I think like because that energy has kind of been there for the whole show, as you say, it's not as much of a distractor as it is when that shifts in like Zabungle, where in the second half you are in stasis for such a long period of time when the show had been very deliberate about having very clear 4 to 5 episode arcs up to that point. Whereas here it's just kind of like, yeah, we're flowing with the vibe, man. Like we're kind of going where we want to go, and it's cool. But I can definitely understand how if you were the guy who had written a whole book and you're like doing all this stuff, and then basically almost all that gets kind of thrown out other than like specific individual ideas, I can definitely see how Watanabe usually would be very frustrated by that process. But obviously, the writers on Tomino shows always have issues with how that ends up going. It's definitely the part where Tomino, I think, struggles the most with managing his role versus other people's roles, is always in the writing side of things.
I mean, ultimately, he is the series composer on all of his works. Yes. And as we get into his, like, big Gundam era that's coming up, it seems like he accepts that more.
Yeah.
And certainly by the time, the 2000s roll around, you have stuff like, Reckon G, there just are no other writers on it, right? I think that's just him doing it all. So, like, yeah, he gets into that more, but this is definitely the area where he has the most trouble letting go. But it is also where he is most distinctive as an artist, so I understand that.
Yes, absolutely. One other person, while I was just talking about the writing, that I did want to shout out, because it's another really good example of this bringing on really young people into pretty massive roles, is that one of the most prominent writers for episodes, she wrote 16 episodes, was Watanabe Mami, who was 25 years old at the time, which is just like, when I was pulling up the staff, I'm like, that's pretty cool.
That's cool, yeah.
That's a pretty major role to have to write basically a quarter of the episodes of the show, or more like a sixth of the episodes of the show.
A lot of episodes, yeah.
Yes, a lot of episodes. I'm not a math teacher.
We didn't mention it yet, this is Tomino's longest show. We'll get into why next week, but this is a 54-episode show. I think it beats Victory Gundam by 3 episodes, because Victory Gundam is 51. And so this is a long show.
Yes. Yeah, and I have done a little bit of reading on it, but I am very excited to see what happens when Tomino is faced with an unprecedented circumstance where they gave him more episodes than he asked for. The show is a couple episodes longer than it was originally intended to be. I'm very curious to see what that looks like. But anyways, one thing that I thought was fucking really wild, because this feels so early to do something like this. To promote the show, Sunrise took a very unusual step of creating an L-Gaim special. Because really, there are 55 episodes to L-Gaim, because there's an episode 0. It's called L-Gaim Special, and it's very different than all the other episodes because it's a live-action interview show. That if you watch modern anime and you follow sort of ancillary media of modern anime, this is like... not only is this common, it's effectively ubiquitous, almost required that you have now they would be live streams and not TV shows, but you have here's members of the cast, and maybe you play the theme song for the first time, and you have a little kind of variety show games that the cast play and stuff like that. This is a really early example of this. It's a 30 episode program. You can find clips of it on YouTube.
30-minute program.
Yeah, 30-minute program. Sorry. I found clips of it on YouTube. Unfortunately, I couldn't find the whole thing. But it basically has Shimazu Saiko, who is the voice actress who played Rag in Zabungle, plays Posaydal here. Yuri from Dirty Pair is what we most know her as. And she interviews Tomino is there. They've got a couple of other actors, like the actor for Daba. They have a lot of live performances by Mio of the opening theme at the beginning and the ending theme at the end, which is very fucking cool. And then Nagano is just in the back, and he's just drawing a mural of characters, and they occasionally cut to him, and he's drawn Lilith and stuff like that up there. But the best thing of this is that it ends with a big QA section. And a bunch of people ask Tomino questions, and it's really interesting hearing him answer them. There's one, I didn't translate this because it would take me fucking 30 minutes to translate the thing. He has this crazy answer about someone asking him his opinions on 3D computer-generated graphics. Now, this is 1984, so this is the very beginning of that being a technology, and he has this incredibly thorough response. He takes 5 minutes answering this dude. It's a totally inappropriate use of time, but it's I was this, it would take me forever to translate it, but it was interesting. But I did translate one response because I thought this response was great. The first question that was asked of Tomino was someone asking him basically, how do you come up with all of your wonderful names, the names for your characters?
That is the first question I would ask him too. Yes. If I got to do a Q&A, and I know you would too, this would be our first question too. So I was so happy when I saw this on your outline, Sean.
And his response, I translated here, I love it. He said, well, usually I come up with them before I go to bed. Sometimes I come up with them on the toilet. Other times it's when I'm getting in the bath. Sometimes I still can't come up with them at all. So I look at the Goju Onhyo, which is the list of all the syllables in Japanese, and I consult that as I go. And when he's saying that, he's just poking at the air, clearly implying that he just has the list of the 50 syllables in Japanese and randomly picks them out to make his names if he can't come up with them, which is the greatest answer to that question that I was not expecting.
We can add this to our one-man show we want to stage of Tomino's long night in the hotel room coming up with Zabungle. Is a scene of him getting out the syllabary and just pointing and picking names out of it because, oh my god, that's awesome. I love that answer.
Yeah, and I just love that his only answer is like, well, sometimes right before I go to bed it comes to me, or sometimes I'm on the toilet and I think it up, or I'm getting in the bath, but if it's not that, I basically just make some shit up by pointing out random syllables. Great answer. It's still wild to me that this L-Gaim special thing exists. It's just such an early example of this kind of thing. It's pretty. I think it just shows the relative popularity of Tomino and the relative celebrity within this sphere. That this gets a little program like this.
It's kind of interesting where what we choose as like what's an episode count and what isn't, because like Double Zeta Gundam is always referred to as a 46 episode show. But it's really 45 because it also has what's basically it's not this kind of special, but it is a sort of recap special kind of thing as it's episode 1, quote unquote. But it's not really episode 1 of Double Zeta Gundam. But that is included in that official episode count and on the Blu-rays. But we'll see, actually. I would be curious if, it probably won't, but it would be cool if this came out on the Blu-ray that's coming out later this year, around the time this episode is dropping from Sentai Filmworks. But like, it doesn't seem like this is included in those Blu-rays. But it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah, because unfortunately, the only way you can see this is pretty gnarly clips on YouTube or Dailymotion, was where I found the longest clip. But I didn't find anything that was the whole show, which is a shame because I'd love to see more of it. I've one last note here, just because I thought that it's it's a little bit hard for these older shows to find good information about the level of success they had, but I thought this was an interesting element here. L-Gaim's aesthetic design and characters proved very popular and influential. L-Gaim's characters and their designs were notably popular with women. I found multiple sources. I didn't find any numbers for that, but multiple sources that commented that there were a lot of female fans of L-Gaim. And Nagano's interest in fashion, which he incorporated the designs, made the characters pop to a younger audience. At the second ever Anime Awards in 1984, both Daba and Leshy won the fan votes for most popular characters, one for the male category, one for the female category. So that gives you some sense of, like, at the time, this was a hip show for the kids, like they were into it.
I can understand why. Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, Sean, do you want me to go through the staff and cast stuff since I put more of that together here?
Yes, yeah, and obviously some of that also was sort of bled through into the history, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll skip anything that we already talked about. But just to recap for everybody, we've got director, obviously, is Tomino Yoshiyuki. He also gets the original work credit. Interestingly, as with Zabungle, these credits are split. Tomino gets the Gensaku credit, which is original work, and Yatate Hajime gets a separate Genan credit. Usually it's just one of those, and then Tomino and Yatate are credited together. On Zabungle, that I think was because he had a co-creator, Suzuki Yoshitake, who shared the Gensaku credit. In this case, Watanabe Yuji, despite writing the show, does not get an original story or original work credit. So it's just that split of Tomino as original work, Yatate as original story. Then we've got Watanabe Yuji as the series composition role. That's probably why he doesn't get that credit, because he has his own as series composer. This is his biggest credit in anime, and after this and a few other smaller projects, he mainly moved into writing light novels, though his career sadly stalled in 1995 due to health issues. But he did come back and write at least one more novel in 2004. And he's credited on 15 episodes. Watanabe Mami, as you mentioned, Sean, is credited on another 16, and Tomino Tsukahiro on 14, Kawahara Yoshie on 5, and Onogi Hiroshi on 5. So the two Watanabes, no relation, I don't think, wrote the bulk of the episodes, along with Tomita Tsukahiro, and then those other guys did about 10 of them. Then you've got character design is Nagano Mamoru. Interestingly, he is the mechanical designer. We know that, but that is not a credit in the show. So he is just credited as character design. There does not appear in the opening credits a mechanical design credit, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't know what the logic behind that was. Maybe there was some internal rule or something about not doing both. Who the hell knows? But we do know, obviously, that he did both of those.
Yes, yeah. It is funny to me that he ultimately gets the character design credit when the mechanical design thing was what he was originally brought on for, and he was already doing for a different show that kind of got absorbed by L-Gaim.
Yeah. Our art director is Ikeda Shigemi, this is Ikeda's third straight show with Tomino in this role after Zabungle and Dunbine. As Sean noted in the Dunbine episode, he continues to be a huge force on Gundam even outside of the Tomino shows. And while he sadly passed away in October of 2024, his very last credit was art director on Gundam Seed Freedom, which, what a fucking note to go out on, because he was the Gundam Seed art director, and he did come back for Freedom. He co-did it with one other person. There were 2 people credited as art director on that movie. But pour one out for a real one. We have really enjoyed watching Ikeda's art across these 3 shows, and obviously we have across all of his other Gundam work too that we've already covered. But yeah, I hadn't caught that before, that he did still work on Gundam Seed Freedom as his last credit, which is so cool.
Yeah, and I think the while the backgrounds are not as prominent as the show as they were in Dunbine, which obviously, like, that being a full fantasy show, it was like a bigger part. You do have, I think in particular, the space sections, just some absolutely gorgeous backgrounds. And like when they go to the Thart Star where Full Flat is, or they go to Posaydal's planet, like some of those, like the more exotic kind of like very techno space locations have some really, really gorgeous backgrounds. It's a very gorgeous art.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And I really love the future cities on the various planets they go to, which are just cities from Dirty Pair. Like, it broke my brain out a little bit that Yuri and Kay weren't running around these cities. But they are such great, like, 80s futurism kind of stuff. It's really cool looking. So yeah, Ikeda is just as reliable as they come, and it's been fun to see all of their work. Our animation director is once again Kogawara Tomonori, continuing on his role from Ideon, Zabungle, and Dunbine for his 4th straight Tomino show, though for the first time he is not also handling character design, and because L-Gaim focused on the younger staff, it does seem like Kogawa was a little bit more hands-off on this one. He's only credited as the episodic animation director on 5 episodes, but younger staff from his studio, Studio Bibo, including Kitazume Hiroyuki and Omori Hidetoshi, both in their 20s, did more of the work. They did 9 and 8 episodes as episodic animation director, respectively. So same philosophy as everything else with Tomino on this show. Kogawa Tomonori also did that within the Studio Bibo crew.
Yes.
And then, gotta talk about this. The music is by Wakakusa Kei, incredibly prolific composer and arranger. He's done a fair amount for anime and live-action TV dramas, although the bulk of his work is in pop music, particularly as an arranger. So, for instance, he arranged the second opening and ending to Gundam Double Zeta a few years after this, and other notable anime he composed for include Hikaru no Go, Dirty Pair Flash, which is that weird OVA spinoff we talked about last season, and the 13th through 17th Crayon Shinchan movies. So, there you go. And he studied under the famous Japanese composer and lyricist Nakayama Daizaburo, who wrote for enka and pop songs, and they were very close. Nakayama actually gave Wakakusa his pen name because Wakakusa was born Saito Toru. And I think the music of this show is one of its absolute highlights. It is one of the best scores for any show we've watched this season. I just think the way it blends sort of big orchestral, sort of John Williams style, Star Wars style music with this very, like, you know, grungy synth music that is more like something you'd hear in kind of a sci-fi B movie, almost more like Terminator-esque, like original Terminator, the Brad Fiedel score. The way it's able to really fluidly move between those is incredibly impressive. It makes for an overall musical palette that's pretty distinct, but it is always just fantastic. And even if an episode is like a lesser episode, just sitting there vibing along with the awesome art and this incredible music is like always a good time. That's how good the music is on this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agreement. I absolutely think, like, the thing about the show, again, to me, is its aesthetic experience is so powerful, and the music is just as key to that as the visuals. And yeah, it's a phenomenal soundtrack. And, you know, it does such a good job of when it is trying to do the Star Wars stuff, because it obviously is trying to do it at certain points, like most notably over the kind of opening narration section, and you have this very kind of Star Wars influenced piece. But I love that it's not just aping Star Wars, which we have seen more than a handful of anime soundtracks over the years, you know, Gundam F91 being one of like the most egregious that are just full on ripping off Star Wars music. And here, this is the kind of thing where it's like, you know, if you took this and put it as like, here is our Star Wars style music, but it's in like a game or one of the animated shows where we're not just using the John Williams score, I'd be like, this is one of the best versions of that I've heard, because I think he does such a good job when he is trying to evoke that style. But as you say, it is fused with this much grungier, more intense 80s kind of synth pop, city pop style music that's so phenomenal. And I remember when I was playing Super Robot Wars, which lets you pull soundtracks off of like a flash drive and play songs in the game when like characters do specific attacks. I got very kind of tired of, as good as the L-Gaim theme is, and we will talk about it, it's one of my favorite themes. There's only so many times you can hear it when your character's doing an attack in that game. And so I was like, I need to get some other L-Gaim music. And I listened to the soundtracks and kind of pulled the action songs. And the action music is so fucking good. And I pulled those for that game, and it was just like, it elevated the experience even more because there's such a good variety of music. There's 3 full soundtracks for it across the whole show. And both styles and moving between those styles, I think it's a fantastic soundtrack that adds a lot to the show.
And the soundtrack for this show is on Apple Music, Spotify today. Not every anime soundtrack of this era is easy to find on that kind of service, but this one is out there, so you can go find it, and it is worth listening to on its own. And then we have the theme songs, and oh my god, I'll tell you, Sean, this is the only show we've watched this season where I never skipped a theme song or an ending theme because they are unfucking skippable. Our opening, L-Gaim, Time for L-Gaim. What a title. With lyrics by Ueno Masayuki, music by Tsutomi Kyohei, arrangement by Matsushita Makoto, and vocals by our good personal friend Mio. The rare Tomino theme without Tomino lyrics, although they're still fantastic. And then our ending, Starlight Shower, which more than makes up for it with a very Rin Yogi set of lyrics, yes. Rin Yogi being Tomino's pen name. Music again by Tsutomi Kyohei, arrangement again by Matsushita Makoto, and vocals again by Mio. And the composer here, Tsutomi Kyohei, was very prolific, award-winning. 39 singles he composed for various artists hit #1 on the Oricon charts, and he won a large number of awards, including a posthumous Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2020 Japan Record Awards. From the summary on his Wikipedia, he released nearly 3,000 compositions, over 500 of which entered the Japanese Oricon singles chart. Tsutomi is the most commercially successful composer of Japanese popular music of the last 5 decades, selling over 76 million units on the country singles chart from 1968 onwards. And I can tell why, because these songs fucking bop.
Yeah, this is like where I regret that we did for our finale of the weekly stuff, the top 10 anime opening and endings, without having the proper L-Gaim experience. Because I had heard the L-Gaim opening before that, because Kaze no Reply, which is the second opening theme we'll talk about next week, is one of the ones that was covered on one of the anime song cover albums. So I'd gone back and was like, I should listen to the original L-Gaim theme as well. It's like, holy fucking shit. But getting it in the proper experience in the show is a different beast. And both these themes are just fucking incredible. The opening has that kind of halftime breakdown that happens in the second half of the verse, where it really pulls back and the bass guitar comes in with this like really sick lick along with the drums. Is just so, it's like fucking drugs. I don't know. It's like I'm like addicted to it. It's like you like put it in my fucking veins. Like whenever that part comes in, it's like I'm like, I have to turn the fucking speakers up because I got to get the bass as heavy as possible. It's just ridiculously fucking good. It's such a catchy composition, and of course Mia's singing is as incredible as ever. And it feels like we are, we're now fully in that era with like city pop music has become a thing where like it feels like the musical compositions are so tailored to a singing style like what Mio has. We're very, very far away from the kind of traditional mecha theme song stuff. And we saw that transition with like Zabungle to Dunbine, which also has an amazing theme, but this is, I think, an even step beyond that one. And it's just like, this is just a fantastic like single on its own. It doesn't need to be attached to the anime, though it is made better being attached to the anime because you do get to have, your theme song title sung in the song, which is to me always delightful, but you also get the little robotic
Yes,
call outs of the heavy metal.
Show me the way to you, every metal. Lead me now where you are, every metal. It's Mio doing a duet with a computer voice. The computer voice fucking rocks. He also comes in on the eye catches, which are great in this show. These are the best eye catches of a Tomino show so far. The animations and the like little synth voices. I've watched a few episodes beyond where we stopped, Sean, and the second set of eye catches you get starting in episode of 27 are even fucking better. Oh man, it's so good. Yeah, this is one of, if not my favorite Mio songs I've heard so far. And then the ending, Starlight Shower, is also fantastic. It's like the perfect version of an anime ending theme in that it has this totally different energy. It's the right energy to lead you out of the episode. It's slower, it's more ballad-like, but it still is so distinctive. I think the lyrics are fucking gorgeous. They're some of my favorite Tomino lyrics. And Mio just getting to belt on that one is awesome. And then the other thing to mention is the animation on the opening is the best of any Tomino show so far. Just like unbelievable. When I cut together the theme song that you guys have been seeing every week on this show, you'll notice there's a disproportionate amount of L-Gaim footage in there, and I hadn't even watched the show yet. I hadn't even heard the song. I pulled the imagery into my timeline and ripped the music off so I could just analyze the imagery on its own without any preconceived notions. And just doing that, I fell in love with how this is visually put together. It's so fun to watch every single episode.
Yeah, it's just, both of them are all-timers. In the Starlight Shower, that's one where, like, I feel like if you're not singing along when it gives the sorega, ima, and all that stuff, if you're not singing that part with her, you have no soul. Like, I don't know what's wrong with you if you can somehow repress the desire. Like, sometimes if it's a particularly good episode, I fucking stand up. I'm like, yes, like I need this in my life. The energy of Starlight Shower is incredible. And I think as good as these songs are, for me, the true mark of a great opening and ending theme is not just the theme itself, but how well can they be repurposed into the soundtrack?
100%, yeah.
Yes, because the instrumental versions that are in Wakakusakei's OST are so incredibly good. And I like that there's they don't you do it all the time, because I think that's a danger, because obviously pulling in the like really strong, powerful melodies from these opening ending themes can be very overpowering. But when they do, particularly for Starlight Shower, which gets repurposed into a couple of tracks, it's so powerful. And you have like that one scene in one of the Stella Koban episodes where Daba gives this big speech about how everyone takes Leshy for granted, and Nobi has this perspective of like, she could die tomorrow. We need to take advantage of everything we have right now, or this rebellion will go nowhere. And everybody is like stunned into silence. And this instrumental version of Starlight Shower is playing underneath it. And it's like, fucking, oh my God. It's so good. And it's just, those songs on their own are amazing. But what they contribute to the soundtrack outside of just those songs is in some ways even more impactful, I think.
Oh, 100%. Couldn't agree more. This is always this. It's like we'll talk about this again when we get to Zeta Gundam, but the last scene of Zeta Gundam using that instrumental track based on Aquia Star, when you can do that well, it's a real magic trick, and this series is able to do that. Just phenomenal. There is an insert song that we get in episode 24, although very briefly. I assume we'll hear it again, so maybe we can talk about it more on the next one. But it is Kizutsuita Jealousy or Hurt Jealousy, which is another one with lyrics by Tomino, music by the same people, Tsutsumi Hyohei, and vocals this time by Ayukawa Mami, who will be the singer for the second opening of this show, but we will all know her as the singer of the first Zeta Gundam opening, so I immediately recognized her voice. And this song rocks. I am excited to hear it again, because that scene in episode 24 is really good, but it is pretty brief.
Yes, and it's a tragic use of a great insert song, because it cuts right before the hook comes in. Because there's this great, this is like Starlight Shower and L-Gaim have city pop influences. Hurt Jealousy is just a full-on city pop banger. It's so good. But it doesn't. But yeah, the way it's used in that episode is very brief, and does not get to the good parts of that song. So yeah, I'm curious to see if it pops up again.
All right. Well, Sean, do you want to go ahead and throw it to the Eyecatch, and then we'll come back, talk about the cast, talk about the story, talk about the substance of heavy metal L-Gaim?
That sounds good to me, Jonathan. Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
So, Sean, where do you want to go with things from here? Do you want to jump into talking about our characters? Do you want to do more broader overview of the show? Where do you want to start here?
I think we could probably get into the characters, because I don't feel like with the overview, at least from a narrative perspective, the narrative is so simple for the show compared to most Tominos, right? That like it is so much on the episode by episode basis, which is where I think the characters really shine.
Yeah. It does have, like, one thing I'll say on the overall is the sort of Star Wars inspiration of it. I did have this thought over and over watching this is like, why hasn't, especially now in this era, Star Wars made a show more in this vein? Because I feel like this would be, you could do it in animation. I think you could also do it in live action. I think you could say The Mandalorian has a little bit of this in like its first season, but where you have like a broad, here's the state of our world, here's the status quo. In this case, it is that there is this mysterious woman named Oldna Posaydal who is ruling the galaxy, or not the galaxy, but the Pentagona World, or the Pentagona system. And you have Daba, who is this sort of prince of a lost kingdom, effectively, is what he is, right? And he's out with his group of rebels, and they're kind of, broadly, like, running this fight against Posaydal. But on an episode-to-episode basis, it's just sort of individual things that happen. And I think that is such a good engine for going around exploring the world, having fun in this setting. Like, it's just enough story that you can go episode to episode, but not too much to overwhelm the cool things you can do on an episodic basis. This is the kind of thing I'd really like to see a Star Wars show do at some point. This would be the right kind of setting for this kind of thing, I think,
Yeah, I'm totally with you. That here's your crew on a simple mission across the worlds to fight against evil. It very much is taking that sort of classical style narrative that is very much the influence on Star Wars, which is these old, obviously, like, there's, you can do the whole Campbellian, Joseph Campbell hero myth stuff, but just more broadly, it is this traditional story of a lost prince. It's your King Arthur, whatever, trying to kind of, fight against tyranny and learn his place in the world. And absolutely, I think like L-Gaim just does a great job of doing that kind of big good versus evil story. While it does have more, and we'll get into this with some of the characters and storylines, it does go into some of the politics. It does have some depth. It's not just trying to be like a fairy tale or something. But it is also not, I think, it's not avoiding the simple pleasures of a simple story. It kind of has a little bit of that complexity where it comes up, but it also is very happy to have, your big, bold, classical style hero in a Daba and go on these big adventures and not overthink things all the time.
Right, because because specifically where it is Star Wars is, although you have Empire and Return of the Jedi are out at this point, and I think you see some Empire Strikes Back influences here and there, less Return of the Jedi, which would have been really new when this came out. But it is that setup of original Star Wars, like and kind of the hidden fortress of it all too, with Kurosawa, which is just boy on world goes out into the bigger world in the way that you could imagine. Today we think of Star Wars Episode 4 as the beginning of the thing it became, which is this kind of bounded trilogy within this set of trilogies. But you could also imagine a version of that original Star Wars that became more of a James Bond kind of series where every movie is just another Skywalker adventure where you never really resolve whatever the overall status quo is. And that would also be a fun version of Star Wars. And that's kind of the thing, like I assume by the end of L-Gaim it will be resolved, but it's able to do that kind of episodic play on it that is a fun other potentiality of what this kind of story is.
Yeah, and that obviously is Star Wars' ultimate roots, which is those pulp sci-fi serials of the 1930s to the 50s. And that is also, again, if you look at the Mugen Stars image boards that Tomino drew, it's very clear that he is pulling from that tradition. Like, some of them look like they could be the covers of, like, an Analog magazine, which is like a classic sci-fi book that published a lot of those kinds of stories. I think it's like he's clearly... It's not just Star Wars. It is the whole world that Star Wars comes from, and the whole genre that Star Wars comes from that he's pulling from. And those are fundamentally serialized stories that are the kind of thing you're talking about, where it's everything, we're on a new adventure and we're going to a new crazy place and meeting new crazy characters. And it's less about the sort of like, we're toppling the empire, even if, again, I'm sure that by the end of the show, we will get more resolution to that kind of thing. Each individual episode does not feel like it's super concerned about moving that central plot line all that much forward. You just get a couple of ones that have bigger moments, like the Kwasan Alibi episode or the Oldna Posaydal episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's talk about our characters and also their performances, because particularly with your main cast, what a set of heavy hitters we've got here, including some in their first roles. For Daba Myroad, our main character, and let's not gloss over that his name is Daba Myroad, or that Daba this is a Japanese ordered name, because Daba is his last name, and so his father is Daba something else, I forget. But really, if people were calling him casually, they would just be going, "Hey, Myroad," because that is his, like, given first name. What a name. It's a great one.
I mean, this is a eternal issue. Either the issue, like sort of debate I have with the show is what the fuck are people's names?
Right.
Because it does seem, generally speaking, they are meant to be Japanese name order, but it has this Ideon problem, because Ideon did the same thing. With Ideon, it's even more inexplicable because they have regular names like Cheryl, but somehow her name is Formosa Cheryl, not Cheryl Formosa. But here it's like, again, nominally, like, Daba is the family name of the people he was adopted by. His original name is Kaman, so Kaman Myroad would be his full name to the Yarmon people. But his adoptive father is named Daba Hasser. We get a flashback, and so people only call him Daba, though. Nobody has ever called him Myroad. People only use that in his full name, Daba Myroad. You have other characters like Leshi or Amu that are exclusively referred to by their supposed given names. But then you get a crazy, because I kind of settled on, well, everyone's kind of referring to them by their given name, which is the second name, except for Daba. But they throw a crazy wrench in it when you meet Kwasan Alibi late in the section we're covering, and everyone calls her Kwasan. I thought everyone was going to call her Alibi, but everyone calls her Kwasan, and I don't know. It is an eternal mystery to me. It's one of those shows like Ideon where I just don't understand what the name order stuff is supposed to signify.
Well, because, like, Daba and Kiao are best friends who've known each other for many years, and they talk to each other casually. So Daba calls him Kiao. His full name is Mirao Kiao. You never hear the Mirao. It's Kiao is what everyone calls him. But Kiao calls Myroad Daba. So I don't know. They've got a weird friendship. Who the hell knows?
And then you've got fucking Lilith, who is Lilith Fao.
Yes.
Are you expecting me to think that Lilith is supposed to be her surname? Because in Dunbine, which had a Western name order for the characters other than when show went to Japan, it's Cham Fao, and Cham is clearly her given name, and it's a fucking mess, Jonathan. It's a fucking mess is what it is.
Well, there's a whole other existential crisis that comes from Lilith Fao being in this show that we can talk about. But let's talk about Daba for a second. Daba is voiced by Hiramatsu Hirokazu, who did not do a ton of anime work outside of L-Gaim, and his appearances in anime were actually so infrequent for so long, including missing from several of the Super Robot Wars games, that there was speculation in fan communities he had died. In reality, it seems that he was working on stage and doing some teaching, just the kinds of stuff that wouldn't be like public-facing on, forums and stuff. But in a great Japanimation station connection, somebody at Kyoto Animation clearly fucking loves this guy, because his return to voice acting was in 2006's The Melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi, where he guest stars in the infamous Someday in the Rain episode as Omori Jiro, the man with the space heater, one of the best scenes in one of our favorite episodes of anime. He then cameos in 2 episodes of Lucky Star, which is a show with many, various voice actor seiyuu cameos, and then had his first first starring role in many years as Mr. Nakanojo in Nichijou. He has also since returned to the Super Robot Wars games, including last year's Super Robot Wars Y. So long journey, but Hiromatsu Hirokazu is back in the world of voice acting, and he's great here. It's a really solid performance of this kind of character, in part because he's around all these actors who either were at the time or would become really heavy hitters. The fact that he sounds a little more outsidery, a little more untrained, I think really serves the character because Daba is different from everyone around him. He is he is the leader, but he is also a bit of an enigma. I really like the vocal quality you get from him.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love this performance. Again, I'm a little bit biased for it because I already played Super Robot Wars Y, and I loved him in that game. And one thing, because you didn't mention, the character he plays in Lucky Star is the main character's father.
Right.
Is Konata's father. So you have that one, very melancholy episode of Lucky Star in the second half that has all the flashbacks about Konata's mother who passed away before the show starts and all that stuff. So it's a role that's only in a couple of episodes, but it's a very important role in that show. So as you say, KyoAni clearly loved this dude, and I love this guy. I think he's fantastic. And I do think it adds something to the show that it is not a voice you've heard a million other places, because sometimes you go back to these, and we'll talk about this with Qiao, who's voiced by an incredibly famous actor who I've heard in a million things, and it's kind of crazy because they're you're hearing this very familiar voice, but with Hiromatsu Hirokazu, is not familiar. I've seen his other roles, but also the other characters he plays that I've seen in the KyoAni shows are not anything like Daba. And so there is something really fresh and cool about having someone who, for who this is their very defining performance, and they just, found other things they wanted to do than voice acting for most of their career. And I do think I think Daba is a hard character to play because he is not your normal Tomino protagonist. He is not your Amuro type, he's not this kind of introverted, kind of timid character who kind of is off in his own world. He also is not your Sho or Camille or, Jidon is a little bit weird, but he probably fits in that other category of this sort of, very passionate, very intense person who can't stand the injustices of the world around them and are constantly at kind of a boiling point, and you get that sort of intensity from those characters, particularly in the combat scenes. Daba is this, again, classical hero. Whenever I think about this dude, I think about King Arthur in your sort of when he is a kind of knight errant, and just pulled the sword from the stone and that kind of stuff. And you have Vortigaunt, I think is the name of the king who has taken over the kingdom and all that kind of stuff. And it has that quality of this guy who has an incredible nobility and an incredible kind of sense of justice and a commitment to making the world a better place, but who has to keep the nature of who he is secret from the world around him. And I think there's a great kind of mysteriousness to the character early on in the show that the performance conveys. You get this clear sense there's a lot more to this guy than what you see on the surface. And he clearly has a bigger goal and a bigger picture that he's working towards, but it doesn't become clear until 6 or 7 episodes into the show when you go to the planet of Mizun, where his people are originally from, and you start to get this intimation that there's something else here. And so I do think that the performance conveys that sort of solid kind of stoicism to the character, this powerful commitment to this bigger, larger mission. But there's almost a coldness to him at times because he isn't like a Jiron. He isn't flying off the handle constantly. He's very calculating in the things that he does and how he approaches things. And he's this natural born leader with this incredible kind of charisma that people assemble around. And I think just the performance really captures that energy. And I think it's a very nuanced main character to have that does not fit into the kind of handful of archetypes that these sorts of protagonists typically do, whether it's a Tomino show or you're talking about other mecha shows that go for that kind of hot-headed hero, kind of like the main character in Zambot 3 sort of thing. And so I just think Daba, it's a great character. I think he really kind of the show hangs around him in many ways, and he's a very interesting character to see because he goes about things in this different way. He's a little bit more intellectual in some ways than the main character of these kinds of shows tend to be. He's got a little bit more of a plot or an idea or a scheme that he's trying to go about, while also being this like fundamentally very ethical and moral person. So yeah, I just think he's a very cool character, and I think the performance just nails it completely.
There are two big ways for me that he is distinguished from other Tomino characters, or protagonists at least. One being he's the captain of the ship. That's a huge one.
Yes.
We've had characters who assume big leadership positions in Tomino shows before, most notably Jiron on Zabungle, although Jiron is never the captain of the ship. Here you literally do have, once they have their ship, the Turner, that is their ship here on L-Gaim, he's sitting in the Captain Bright chair. He's doing the kind of Captain Bright style stuff, and so it is more in that vein of a character. But then also this show just positions him as the hero in a way that Tomino doesn't usually, other than the closest would be, and I think this show also has a lot of relations to this one, is Daitarn. Haran Banjo is the hero, right? But here you have that to the degree that late in the run of episodes we watched, Sean, they add into the episodic formula a moment at the end of every episode where there's kind of a big kiss-off line about Daba's heroism. They start this in episode 20, which is the one on Hell Palarta, as the next stage calls it, which is that place where they basically have a workers' revolt against the boss, Bon Sans. And at the end of that episode, all the workers are thanking the crew of the Turner for like coming and saving, helping them kick off this revolt. And Daba turns to them and says, "Where there's trouble, Daba Myroad will be there." And I took note of that because I'm like, yes, it's this Batman style kind of superhero moment. And then that becomes a thing in almost every episode, is there will be a moment like that where either Daba says something like that or someone else says it about him. In episode 22, it's one of the characters on the planet says, "That man, he gives the people the will to resist Posaydal," and is like in awe of it. In another episode, let me see if I have it in my notes here. I'm trying to... sorry, I can't find another one here, but because my notes are handwritten and there's many of them because we watched a lot of episodes. But it is a consistent thing that starts happening in these episodes, and it's something I like, and it's something that's interesting, that I think distinguishes him from your other Tomino heroes who typically have a little bit more of a tortured quality, or they are flying off the handle, or whatever that is. But it is paired with, as you were saying, Sean, this slightly colder, more calculating thing where while he is very openly heroic, we also don't ever quite know what's going on in his head. And that's kind of the King Arthur quality, too, I think, of it, of the guy who's a little elevated amongst his, Knights of the Round Table, who we kind of have more sense of their interiority than we do of his.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think you really hit it there, that he has this sort of more classical hero elements that the show does start bringing up more and more, where he is clearly like he's destined to be the leader of this revolution. It's sort of what happens in the Stella Koban arc, but that, where he slowly starts taking control of that organization, kind of to the chagrin of Stella, whose position gets threatened, and then obviously that whole situation kind of implodes before he can fully organize a massive resistance. But it's an interesting thing of seeing him, watching him kind of like grow into this like big kind of destiny he has to be this fated opponent against Posaydal. And he just has that sort of sense of this sort of destined hero quality to him, where he does, sometimes some crazy shit. Like the 2 episodes where he tries to confront Posaydal is kind of nuts for a character to do. Like in any other show, you couldn't imagine the hero going and trying and so brazenly directly confronting like the Emperor in Star Wars, and Luke's just like, fuck it, let's just go, like let's just do it. But there's something about Daba that he's a ballsy character. Like he has that sense of like, I know what needs to be done, I'm gonna do it come hell or high water. The other thing with Daba is that he has that sort of like powerful charisma, and he's a character that I can, even if not every episode I always love the love triangle stuff with Amu and Leshy. But I can buy that those 2 women would be head over heels in love with this guy, because I would buy that everybody would. I think there is like a simple...
That's the Haran Banjo quality, right? That's the...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Haran Banjo of it. And you have, in one of the later episodes we've watched, I think it's episode 24, you do get a Daba shower scene. And,
Yes.
and like the way that they depict that shower scene feels like it is very intentionally meant to be erotic. And you do have a great moment at the end where he's running out basically naked, and Amu turns to the camera and goes like, I saw it.
She goes, I saw it.
L-Gaim.
Oh, I can't get married anymore, can I? Kidding. She kind of breaks the fourth wall for that. It's great. That also, I think that is the episode that ends with, this is where I was getting distracted looking for a line about Daba being a hero, because I saw the line I had written down of Amu saying, I'm always hot for Daba.
Yes.
Or is that Leshy? I think that's Leshy. It's they're talking.
That's Amu.
Okay.
Because that's the episode where he gets the fever.
The fever, yes.
And she says, I'm always hot for Daba.
It's great. Yeah, Hot for Daba would be another good name for this show. But yes, Daba rocks. And now, Sean, because you made the joke with the Emperor, I'm imagining an alternate version of the original Star Wars where Obi-Wan dies, they get off of the Death Star, and in a rage over Obi-Wan's death, Luke makes them pilot the Millennium Falcon to the Emperor, and they just go straight to it right then. That'd be a fun, like, alternate what-if Star Wars video game. I'd be down for that.
Yeah, just go blow up that dude's fucking statue on Coruscant and just like, fuck you, man. Check this shit out. Wham.
It's awesome. All right, let's talk about our other characters here. We have Amu, Fenelia Amu, voiced by Honda Cheiko, one of a few major actors making their voice acting debuts here in this show. We will also know her as Puru and Puru 2 in Gundam Double Zeta, Kasuga Kurumi in Kimagure Orange Road, Anil L in Afterwar Gundam X, and Kaoru Kozue in Revolutionary Girl Utena, and countless other roles. Just huge actor in this period. She sadly died very young of cancer in 2013. She was only 49, but she's one of those people you always love to hear, and she's so good here. It's so cool to hear her in this big a role, this confident, this excellent, just right out of the gate, because Amu is an awesome character. She's extremely funny. She's got great chemistry with the rest of the cast, and Honda is just giving like a spot-on comic performance just out the gate. It's incredible.
Yes, absolutely. I was kind of floored when I realized it was her. It was like, God, this sounds so familiar. And then I heard there was a line she said, like, that's fucking Pudu, isn't it? That's fucking Pudu. And I was like, hell yeah, it is. It is crazy that she just feels like she comes fully formed as an actress in this show. You don't feel any sort of like on ramp. It's just like, yep, she is really fucking good at what she does. And they're clearly like Dirty Pair, either as a direct influence or there's just Dirty Pairs in the air because it's the 80s and we're all fucking, breathing the same shit. But she's very much, if you're making the Dirty Pair comparison, she's the Yuri, and Leshy is the K. And I do think that Amu with her, like, she's got her like fashion and her like the like almost like turban thing she has. She's definitely a very comic character, but I love that she comes in, like in that episode where they storm Gustgal, Posaydal's home planet, and she comes in at the last second to save the day. I do love that, as with all the kind of lead characters, they have comedic elements, but none of them are purely comic relief. You don't have someone who's just here to be the butt of jokes or to generate gags. They are all really vital members of the team, and it's a pretty odd, like, frequent plot device in the show is tensions existing amongst the main group. You referenced that episode earlier about Czech and her sort of like old flame that she runs off to, and there's this constant sense of like, it's difficult for all these people to be together all the time, but they all need each other. And if Amu is not there, the group is not going to function. It's true of all of these lead characters. And it's a thing I really like about how the show treats its main cast, is it has fun with it. It does have the comedic elements, but it never lets that undermine their dramatic function within the ensemble.
I mean, it's one of the things that I think distinguishes this from Daitarn is that the whole cast is so well fleshed out in a way where Daitarn, Haran Banjo is great. I'm forgetting the name of the butler, but the butler guy is great. And then Garrison. And then I think like the two women on the crew and the little kid, it kind of depends on the episode. It kind of depends on what they're doing with them in the moment. But there isn't like, the ensemble isn't deep enough to make a show like that work all the time. Here, the ensemble is so good that even if you have an episode story that you're not 100% into, you just dig being with the characters. And that's the key to a show like this, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can like have, in different episodes, different characters rise in their level of importance, which allows that sense of pacing that while it's very episodic, the tension of the show shifts very naturally amongst that kind of core group of 4 main characters. Or kind of like 5 if you want to put Gabble in there, because he's in almost every episode as well. And so sometimes one or the other is much more lifted up in the overall kind of like mixture, and that allows the show to generate a lot of variety within a very episodic style series.
Yeah. So Amu, we love her. We also love our boy who keeps trying to betray Daba, but he just can't because Daba is so damn cool. And that is Mirao Kiao, voiced by, also making his anime debut, Otsuka Hochu, which blows my mind, given what a confident movie star performance he is giving here, not just as Cow, but also, I mean, it's in character, but he is the narrator. He's the person who does the opening, like, crawl, or I say opening crawl because of Star Wars, it's not a crawl, but he does the opening voiceover, he does the next episode preview, so he's pulling double duty here. And of course, Otsuka Hochu is one of those actors where if you start listing performances, you'll just never stop. Here's a couple we care about. Yazan Gobble from Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta, Chibity Crockett from Mobile Fighter G Gundam, Jiraiya from Naruto, Mont Blanc Nolan from One Piece, and Z from One Piece Film Z. Genuinely one of his best performances. That movie is fucking incredible. Urokodaki in Kimetsu no Yaiba. I loved finding this out. He is the dub voice of Piccolo in Dragon Ball Evolution, the live-action movie, which makes me kind of want to see at least a couple scenes from that. And right now, you'll hear him as the narrator and Takamura in the hit anime Sakamoto Days. But obviously, he's just one of those actors who, if you've ever watched anime, you have heard Otsuka Hochu. And, like, he's fantastic here. He's so funny, but he's also able to go like down to earth and sell the reality of this guy who's kind of a scumbag, but with a heart of gold. He's, roughly your Han Solo of the group, but ultimately he's also like, just fiercely, fiercely loyal despite himself. And him and Daba have such a great, easy chemistry. This guy is just so fun to have around. He's so good at modulating for the narrator parts as well. It's such a great performance.
Yeah, this one absolutely blew my mind because he's one of my favorite actors, particularly Jiraiya in Naruto, who's the Naruto's mentor in that series. It's just an amazing character, an absolute fan favorite. And so it's an actor that I just adore, and I love every performance I've ever heard from him. And this was a character that I knew existed because he's in Super Robot Wars Y, but it's a non-voice performance because he's like a pretty minor character in that game. He only exists, there's like a mechanic where you can have support characters from the shows and you can activate them at specific points and they just give your team like a specific kind of buff. I don't remember what his is. I think he gives you more energy or something. But it's a non-voiced thing because all of the support characters are non-voiced. And so I had no idea who voiced this guy, but I was very familiar with his character design, and there's this L-Gaim dude with the fucking pompadour and the jacket and the whole thing. And so when he shows up and he opens his mouth, and it's Otsuka Hochu, and not just is it him, it sounds exactly like him.
Yes.
Like his voice has not changed in 40 years. It's crazy. And it's like, I literally paused the episode because I'm like, I can't believe that's the voice coming out of this fucking dude who I've seen off and on in fucking Super Robot Wars. And it took me a second just to like wrap my head around it because honestly, he sounds more like what I expect Otsuka Hochu to sound like in this than he does as Yazan in Zeta, partially because he doesn't usually play bad guys. And so his Yazan voice is a little bit different.
It's more of a character voice in Zeta where he's disguising it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just couldn't fucking believe it was him. But man, he's so good. And it's like him. I think that's true of Honda Chieko as well. Jaime Sho, who's Gable in this, we'll talk about him, but he was Burn Bunnings in Dunbine, and that was basically his debut role. Like, it's just, you get some of these actors that they just come out of the oven fully cooked. And it's kind of unbelievable that they just feel as good in their like first performance as they do in something they're doing today. And I just don't understand how that's possible because you have other actors that are also incredible actors, like we'll talk about Kawamoto Mari in a second, who was Cham in Dunbine, And there she was good from the beginning. Like, I liked her, but you could see her grow. Like, she is a very different actress at the end of Dunbine than she was at the beginning. Now, to be fair to her, she also wasn't an actress at all originally.
Right.
So there's a bigger curve there than someone who was intentionally trying to be an actor, and she was like a cosplayer that ended up as an actress. But there are other examples of actors that have that. Like the guy who played Jiron in Zabungle. I would say that's true to a certain extent of Hidematsu Hirokazu here as well.
Wakamoto Norio in Dunbine, who you don't hear, he becomes more Wakamoto-ish as the show goes along.
Yeah, it blows my mind when you get some of these actors that feel like, holy shit, you just come out swinging, and they're just as good as they've ever been, and he's so great in this role. And you have some of those episodes, particularly I love Kao in the Stella Koban arc, where there's that great tension between his loyalties to Daba as a friend, but his lack of kind of like faith in this other organization, which I think is a fair thing, because Stella, I think, is like there's good, bad parts about that dude as a leader. And he's obviously not kind of ever destined to be the real leader of the revolution. And so you have that episode where he's accused of being a traitor based on kind of circumstantial stuff he had no control over, and his loyalties are tested. And you have some of those great scenes where he like kind of sneaks back in and is talking to Daba at night, and then they both get captured, and he's sort of starts weeping. There's like, I never meant this. I didn't want this. Like, I never wanted you to get hurt because of me. And you just get that powerful sense of how loyal of a friend he is, even if he struggles with how to figure that out. And he very much feels like, a lead up to some of the characters you get like Bicha and Double Zeta that have a similar kind of thing, where they are someone who's grown up in poverty and kind of the backwaters, and has incredible loyalty to their friend, but also has this incredible desire to move up in the world and move out of this kind of like bottom of the social rung that they were born into. And there's a conflict there, and that ultimately he, comes out with just like to back Daba is the right move. But seeing that growth in the character over the first like 15 or so episodes was very cool.
Absolutely. Because, I love how you continue to see that obviously he has those dueling instincts, like you were talking about, of wanting to move up in the world, often for Daba's sake, because he knows Daba isn't like going to be the guy who does that for them, even though he's loyal to him. But I always love that it comes back to like, he just does not ultimately ever have it in him to leave his friends behind. He is too fundamentally loyal, and that makes him, even though sometimes he's a little bit of a dirtbag, he is someone you admire because of that. And again, this is a theme we've seen across this season, Sean. Tomino's ability to cast people who would then become huge is just uncanny, and it continues for the rest of his career. Don't forget that Romy Park makes her debut on fucking Turn A Gundam. It's just, it's something he's very good at.
Yeah, and I particularly like the 2-for-2 narrator thing here. I guess like 2-for-3. Ginga Banjo was already well established, but don't forget, Ginga Banjo was the narrator for Zabungle, then Wakamoto Norio was the narrator for Dunbine, and Otsuka Hochu is the narrator for this show. It's like, what the fuck?
Yes, it's
like,
great.
The dude could cast a narrator, tell you what.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we've got Kawamura Maria in a dual role here as Gao Haleshi, great name, and Lilith Fao. So either Tomino just can't get enough of Kawamura, or he was absolutely dead set on getting her and Nagano together and thought having her in 2 roles instead of 1 would make that easier. I don't know, but it's for our benefit, because Kawamura, if she wasn't a fully defined voice actress at the beginning of Dunbine, she sure as fuck is by the time of Heavy Metal L-Gaim, because she is so good here. She is giving totally that kind of like movie star performance as Leshy, just a powerhouse performance. Lilith doesn't talk for a while, but once she does, it is kind of in that Cham Phao vein, and she's very good. And it is just cool to hear Kawamura get to stretch her legs here in both of these parts. We can probably take them one at a time. Gao Haleshi may be a little easier to talk about because she isn't a fairy.
Yes. Yeah, I love Leshy. This is another character that is all over Super Robot Wars, so I have a lot of affection from her from that game as well.
Is she voiced in that one?
Yes, yeah, she's voiced in that one. And interestingly enough, you can have either long hair Leshy from the beginning or short hair Leshy, depending on, there's a choice early on with her.
I do love that moment when she does it's a great episode where she cuts the hair off and she just has the Miyazaki bob cut under it.
Yes.
It does feel like it feels like a little bit of a reference there, because just knowing that Miyazaki is often on Tomino's mind, just how it becomes less of that in subsequent episodes, but in that moment when she gets the haircut, she just becomes Nausicaa with red hair, and I do love it.
Yeah, I love it. I did go with the bob cut version when I played the game, not even realizing that was what her main hair was. I just thought it looked better. But yeah, I love Leshy. Again, in the dirty pair at the heart of this show around Daba. She's obviously the K, where she's the more kind of like masculine coded. She is technically was originally a member of the Extra 13, the Elite 13, or whatever the fuck you want to call them. In Super Robot Wars, I called them the Extra 13. My subtitles of the version I have say Elite 13. I'm very curious what the official English release will call them, because it's a weird term to try to translate that doesn't really mean anything. But, going from this kind of like sort of elite member of the other time, but the bottom, she was number 13 of the Extra 13. I think this is one area where I don't think the show's sort of like maxi plot writing is like so good that I think that it's a little bit struggles on really showing that full character turn. I think it relies a little bit too much on her just kind of being in love with Daba. But I do like the overall notion of, this kind of looking at the classic Tomino antagonist setup of them living in a den of vipers where everybody's backstabbing everybody else. It's all just people fueled on their own ambition, come hell or high water, unless she obviously doesn't fit in with that group. And so seeing a guy who's just like nice and believes in people, it's like, this seems just a little bit better than sticking around with all these assholes. Again, I think it could have been like, it feels like the character shows up too much of a like predetermined conclusion that she's going to turn. Like, it just like starts that like right away. I kind of wish that there was a longer arc leading to her joining the good guys. But once she's on the team, I just think, like Leshy is such a fun addition. And I love how capable of a pilot she is. She's not there. It's a lot like Marvel in Dunbine. She's not there to be put to like get beaten and put into danger and go get saved by Daba, which is a thing that happens with this sort of character in lots of these kinds of shows. And here, like, she really holds her own and oftentimes is going toe-to-toe with who, like, Mohan or someone like that, while Daba is dealing with whatever the central plot threat is because he's the main protagonist.
Yeah, this is a kind of archetype we've seen in these last three shows. It's kind of like Rag in Zabungle, it's Marvel in Dunbine, and then it's Leshy here of like the secondary pilot who is still very capable. I think Leshy pops off the screen more than any of those to me. I really love her as a character. Obviously, the character designs across the board here are just fantastic. We talked a lot about Nagano's mechanical designs, but boy, the character designs also, they do not feel like someone doing this for the first time. Oh my god, they really look great. And we talked about the fashion and some of that stuff, but just the basics like of the hair and the faces and all of that looks so good. But yeah, I really, as you said, love that character. Love that you can have episodes where like Daba shows up in the L-Gaim a little bit, but she is like the core pilot of the episode will be something that happens sometimes. She will get big fights where she gets to win. It's really good stuff. And when, she is the last member to basically join the crew. And when you have her, click into place, that 4-person team just feels so right. Like that's part of, I totally understand what you're talking about with maybe there could have been a longer arc there. It also just feels so right. Like they clearly planned from the beginning that this is our ensemble, that I think maybe I got that intellectually, but I was just like, finally the gang's all here. Let's get off to the races, Yeah.
I mean, it's the kind of thing where I think in other Tomino shows, it feels like that would have been a bigger narrative thing that you would have to go through to get this character to turn. It's one of those places of where the characters in this show are not always written like Tomino shows, where you don't get the kind of really rich internal psychology for a character like Leshy, which I think you would need to, by necessity, show a bigger struggle and a more complex way by which she has to turn. Like, I don't think you ever get a sense of why was she a member of Posaydal's army in the first place? Like, where did she come from? Like, that whole kind of thing. And so I think if you're comparing it to some of Tomino's other stuff, it is a little bit lacking in that sense because there isn't that incredibly rich interiority to the character. But if you're looking at it more like a Daitarn 3 kind of thing, where, it's not like there's a incredibly rich interiority to beautiful Tachibana or Reika in those shows. Here, I think Leshy's a character that pops so well. She's a character that's so entertaining to see with, the character design, the performance, the writing for her is so fun and fits so well with the rest of the gang that on that role, which is what the character or what the show is most interested in, the show most needs, she functions incredibly well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just some really good episodic stories with her. I really like the turn in the middle where she sort of manipulates Amu to stay behind on Mizun when they set out. And so she's there, but then she immediately feels like total shit about it. And I really like that. And I like that even though, because some of the love triangle bickering, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it feels a little light, but that's one where I think there's some good character stuff there. You haven't seen episode 27. The next episode after this batch is a Leshy episode that's really good on her. Gets a little more into that. There's a scene with her and Gavle that does feel more of a Tomino version of this character. So some of what you're talking about, I wonder if we'll get more of that in the second half. But just a great character all around.
Yes, and then we've got Lilith slash Cham. Although the one thing I do like is that while it is just her character design, it is not a reinterpreted Cham Phao. Her fashion's a little bit different, but the rest of it is just that character from Dunbine. I did appreciate that her personality is different, right? She's a much more timid character. She is, you go through this whole thing where she's very silent for the first 15 or so episodes with little tiny vocalizations, which I wonder how much of that was them being give Kawamoto Maria a little bit of an onboard to playing two characters in the show at the same time, or if that was just the original idea was to have her kind of come out of her shell a little bit. But I just like with Cham, I really love Lilith, and particularly once she becomes a more active character, and she's in the cockpit of the L-Gaim with Daba and shouting as they're fighting and stuff like that. There's something about this kind of fairy-like character with the hero fighting inside of the mech. I love that dynamic. I think it adds it gives Daba something another element to do in those action scenes, that it gives the writers a little bit more stuff that they can pull from by having two characters kind of active in the same cockpit and they can kind of talk to each other. Or because Daba is such a stoic guy, it gives Lilith the ability to kind of express the urgency of what is happening in the combat sequences. I just think that it's a really interesting dynamic that I think is actually very effective, but it's also so kind of weird. It makes this that other characters don't always do it, or other shows don't do something like this all the time. But I kind of get why Tomino would want to bring it back, even if it doesn't always feel like it fits in the broader setting of Pentagona World. It is a little bit conspicuous that we don't have any other non-regular human-looking people other than arguably Posaydal, but she also doesn't look like she's that because she was born that way, I guess.
Right. I mean, on that level, if you did not watch Dunbine, I assume it is baffling that there's just a fairy hanging around. It has, because obviously the fairy in Dunbine makes total sense because it's such a part of the world. It's literally a part of the lore is that one of the fairies brings Sho into Byston Well and all of that stuff. So it's a huge part of the story. Here it's just there happens to be a fairy hanging around. But if you can get over that, I absolutely love Lilith. I think you can see how the journey they took with Cham on Dunbine informs it, because the way Cham becomes more of comic relief and some of the ways they find to have fun with her physicality over the course of Dunbine, they get to hit the ground running with here. So one is she's just very funny. I think the character animation on her is stellar at all times. They have a lot of just great stuff of her in the background. They immediately start doing the fun stuff of putting her in fun little spacesuits, which I always took note of. One of my favorite things is the equivalent of the normal suit in L-Gaim for when they're out in space is this big, crazy, bulky thing that looks like they're wearing these giant boxes on their heads and stuff. And so when they make one for Lilith, it's also weirdly boxy, just proportioned to her tiny little body. There's so much fun stuff with her in the show, her kind of dynamic within the, there's a whole one where she's in the background of a scene trying to do the dishes and she's flying a plate from one sink to the drying rack. And you're guys, help her out. She can't lift the plates. This is abuse of poor Lilith. But I love Lilith. And I kind of doubt there will be any more lore stuff around her. It really just feels like she's there because Tomino just enjoyed having a fairy in the cockpit every episode, so let's keep it going, and I'm fine with that. It does make me imagine, like, what if that just became a signature of him, where, like, in Gundam moving forward, instead of Haro, just, the Gundam boys had a fairy with them, and it was a member of the Fao family, and there's some Tomino multiverse, and then in Turn A Gundam is where we learned all the fairies come together in the future,
yes,
and unite all these stories.
Yeah, the Turn A Gundam itself is just a fairy with a big mustache. That's all it is.
Indeed. So, love them. And then our last main character, Mr. Gavlet Gabale, an all-time great Tomino name, so nice he used it twice. And of course it is our boy Hayami Sho, who we heard as Burn Bunnings on Dunbine, and we also know as Tosaka Tokiomi on Fate Zero, Aizen on Bleach, and the security chief from Dirty Pair episode 13.
His most beloved role
Yes.
of all of his very beloved roles, security chief.
I am kind of stunned by the way Hayami Sho is able to go from... Largely, the position in the show is the same between Burn Bunnings and Gavlet Gabale as the kind of like lead rival pilot who keeps failing. But Burn is this noble, upstanding knight, and he's so good in that part. And Gavlet is a bumbling Team Rocket kind of dude. And Hayami Sho just doesn't miss a beat moving from one of those to the other. He's very funny here. He gets to be menacing when the character has to be. And it's a really great performance coming off of Burn and doing that kind of 180. I'm really impressed by it in that sense.
Yeah, because it's fantastic because it's the kind of thing where Gabale wishes that he was Burn Bunnings,
yes,
right? Like he's the guy who's like, I feel like I should be. I'm this like kind of minor noble who's like, I need to be part of this army and work my way up and all this kind of stuff. But he's also very much willing to get his hands dirty and backstab people in his pursuit for power. But where Burn Bunnings had the actual juice, and, we have issues with some of, like, the episodic stuff with the Black Knight, but that dude could fucking throw down. Gable's a bit of an idiot who keeps on failing up, obviously he is an effective pilot. Like, you always get the sense that he is a threat. Like, he's not completely incompetent, but also that he is the guy who's always going to fuck up, one step before the finish line. He's going to trip over himself. And I think it's so fun to have Hayami Sho, again, make that kind of turn where he goes from playing the real deal to the guy who wishes he was the real deal, but still has the same voice. He still has that same deep, resonant, super confident, very powerful, wonderful voice that Hayami Sho has. But underneath it with Gabale is all this sense of like insecurity that just holds him back, that just kind of gets worse and worse in some ways over the course of the show, where he starts as like a bit of an idiot who clearly is like, again, very much driven by his own ambitions, but does not seem like that bad of a guy when you meet him in the first couple episodes. He shows up in like episode 2, 3. But then like by the time we're at the end of the section we've been covering, like he's a pretty, despicable person. He's doing some pretty awful shit. Like you have that whole episode where they've got the woman who's the daughter of Lilin, the
Asfi,
mercenary. Yeah, Asfi, her daughter. And they trick her into thinking that Daba is the object of her revenge, when in fact it's Hashimosha, who is Gabale's underling, right? And that Gabale is just very directly manipulating and using her in this almost like Shakespearean way. It's like in reality, your true, goal for vengeance is right in front of you the whole time. And so I like that sense of Gabale, who, he keeps on kind of failing, but he gets close enough, and they give him a ship, they give him this crew, they give him all this stuff, and he just starts becoming like a worse and worse person over the course of the series, while always still being like entertaining and lovable and funny when he needs to be. But I do think there is like a clear sense of character progression and evolution with him as he becomes more and more desperate to prove himself, more and more frustrated that he just can't quite beat Daba, and those like that kind of slightly more noble quality to the guy that existed in those early episodes has pretty much eroded away by the time we get to episodes 24, 25, 26.
Yeah, a bunch I want to comment on here. I mean, one thing I will say versus the Burn Bunnings thing is that while definitely Burn Bunnings has the juice more than Gavlet Gabale, I will say in an episodic structure, I do think Tomino is better at giving Gavale wins over the course of it, so it feels a little less ridiculous. Like, he can push Daba to the edge. There are episodes where like he effectively would win if not for something else comes out. Just little things that like the fact that Burn Bunnings never makes a dent in anything is kind of a problem, I think, in Dunbine that is a little more adjusted here. But then, yeah, I think one of the cool threads I love here is Daba and Gavlet's relationship, where Gavlet, like, you keep getting to moments where Daba could take him out, and Daba keeps saying he wants to believe that Gavlet could be better. In episode 21, at the end of that episode, he talks about how he wants to believe in this guy, and he reflects to the crew that it's only chance they wound up as enemies. He says it was this crazy string of events. He very easily could have been our ally. And it's after that in one of the subsequent episodes where you finally have that moment during one of their battles where Daba breaks and goes, I have never hated you more than I do right now. That's episode 22, so it's the one right after. And it like takes some space for like Daba to like really get to a point where he fucking hates this guy. And that's the one where you have Olabi, his half-sister, and Gavlet basically stops Daba from getting to... Olabi is retreating, and Daba can't follow her because of Gavlet, and that's where he says, I've never hated you as much as I do right now. And so I like some of that internal character consistency too, where Daba is the heroic guy who wants to believe the best of his enemies as well as his friends, and he kind of has to be proven that Gablet has given up his humanity at a certain point. And I like that kind of thread. And it also comes to a head in the last episode of this stretch we watched, 26, where you have the Stack mobile suit and Heavy Metal. And I will never unlearn my Gundam conditioning. But anyway, and the big fight over that at the end and how that kind of comes to a head and how frustrated Gablet gets by that. Even though it is more of a Team Rocket kind of figure, I do think there's really good consistency in terms of how they characterize him across these 26 episodes.
Yeah, because he's designed to be that from the jump instead of like Burn, wasn't. Because early on in Dunbine, you had a pretty big stretch of that show where Sho could not beat Burn.
Yes. That
Burn was too good for him, and Sho was like, fighting Todd, and if Burn came in, it was just, you couldn't win. And then there's that great arc where they're not fighting Burn for a while, and then when it comes back to that conflict, Sho has grown enough that he can beat him. The problem is that then at that point, they don't really know what to do with him anymore. Whereas here with Gablet, it is from the beginning, he's a little bit more designed like some of the Zabungle bad guys, but even then, like even further to be more episodic. And so you don't get, I think, like kind of tired of him in the same way you do, because you're never set up to expect a very dramatic character transformation. It's a very slow shift of that dynamic between him and Daba that starts to sour even more and more as the series goes on.
They also do, I think, a brilliant choice of giving him his own little supporting cast. He's got his ship, the Slender Scala. Great name for a ship. And he's got Elaine, who is his captain, who is way more competent than he is, but she has to suffer under this idiot. So he's got this whole, like, crew of women that he works with. And the other kind of most major character we should probably mention is Nemo Han, who is sort of your secondary recurring antagonist, who sometimes also is effectively a rival for Gablet. And I think that also, the ability to have another antagonist who can come in for an episode and you can take a break from Gablet for a week helps this show a lot. But also the fact that she has a connection to Gablet and they have their own little rivalry going on, all of that keeps the dynamics really fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we wanted to just throw in the Nemo Han discussion here because that's absolutely like the dynamic here is in many ways Nemo Han is the actual Burn Bunnings in that she is the one that, like, they typically end up fighting her off somehow, but they kind of barely manage to do it. Like, even at the point where we are in about halfway through the show, there's still a sense that Nemo Han is a better fighter than Daba and the rest of the crew. And they kind of get by through the skin of their teeth when they're fighting Nemo Han, whereas they can pretty soundly defeat Gablet when they need to. And with Nemo Han, it's actually interesting because I had to do a little research for this because her actress, this is the only acting credit I can find for her other than her playing this character in Super Robot Wars. And this actress is so obscure that I actually discovered that she is miscredited in every single English source I have found where they credit her as in English as Takeuchi Harumi. Her name should be read Takeuchi Kumi. and I'd like double checked multiple times. It's very clearly it should be Kumi. Hanami isn't even like an obvious reading of the kanji for her name, but I'm very certain that her name is Takeuchi Kumi. So I'm very interested to see if the English release credits her appropriately. But yeah, this is just someone who I have no idea the circumstances. There's almost nothing known about her, about why she never pursued voice acting more. I think you can tell that she's not a super refined actress compared to someone like a Hyundai Chiyoko, but I really like her. She reminds me a lot, and the vocal quality reminds me a lot of, I'm blanking on her name, the character in Double Zeta.
I know exactly who you're talking about, yeah. I should look it up, but I was thinking that too.
Kara Soon, that's her name.
Yes.
Yeah, that's like the punk rock star looking lady. That she has like a very naturalistic kind of raspy quality to her voice that's not what you normally get in a lot of voice actresses. But I think that adds so much to Nemohan. That is this like kind of, I mean, she is obviously our Kotosu / Haman Karn / Hararu from Ideon, your sort of powerful woman who is very dominating, and I mean that in multiple like kind of inflections of that word. She very much is in that kind of position, and she's so confident in herself. You have like in multiple encounters early with Gable where she's like willing to basically strip down in front of him almost as like a power play, and just kind of flaunt that. And I think that there's just such a intense confidence to this character, and she's just fucking cool. Like, she's so cool. The character design, I think the voice, the way she's written, where she is an incredibly effective pilot, but she's also very cunning, right? Like, there's that whole part where she, in the Stella Koban section, disguises herself, Haman Karn Double Zeta style, puts on a wig to hide the magnificent hair, because if anyone sees this hair unhindered, they will know immediately who this person is. So she has to put on a brunette wig and sneaks in to try to sabotage their base and stuff. She ultimately is the one who's able to kind of really, Chai Char, who we'll talk about a bit, like contributes to the final battle that defeats Stella Koban's resistance. But as soon as Ne Mohan comes onto that scene, there's just a sense of like, there is no way for these guys to really beat her, because not only is she a very skilled fighter, but she's very smart about how she goes about things. She's a lot smarter than Chai Char. She has this connection to Giwaza, who we haven't seen a lot of yet, but who's kind of the leader of the Extra 13. And I just think that this character just comes off so fucking cool so immediately. And then on top of that, they give her like the coolest fucking heavy metal ever.
Yes.
The L-Gaim. This big gold, looking motherfucker. Where I believe that Nagano Mamoru also designed the Hyakushiki.
He did, and it's a very clear precursor to the Hyakushiki, yes.
Yeah, and it has these massive fucking Elmeth-looking kind of shoulder pads. And if there's any great tragedy in the history of Star Wars, it is that George Lucas never saw Heavy Metal L-Gaim before he made the prequels. Because imagine General Grievous, but instead of the whole thing being, I've got 4 arms, so I've got 4 lightsabers, it's I've got giant shoulder pads that are just full of like 1 billion fucking lightsabers that I could just shoot out, throw out, whatever. It's so ridiculous, but it's so awesome. And when she shows up with this thing, you're like, God, we're fucked. Like, you can't. She just manhandles the L-Gaim like nobody's business, and it fucking rules. I think this character is so cool. And I love that she gets to be in this position where, at least so far, she has continued to be very, very effective, and she's only used in very deliberate scenarios. And Gable is the one who gets to be the kind of dope who always loses, and she gets to feel like the real threat when she comes out.
Yeah, again, I just think that this show finds the right balance for the kind of show it's trying to be in a way that neither, and again, maybe this could change in the second half, but neither Zabungle or Dunbine found quite the right, especially in their second halves, balance with how to deploy their antagonists. And I think the setup here for like the episodic formula works really well because of all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other of the major characters we want to talk about here?
Because I think some of these we'll talk about in their individual episodes. One I want to talk about, partially because it is one of my favorite character designs. It's the most ridiculous character design. Is Amandra Kamandra.
Yes.
Who hasn't, in the stretch we're covering, he hasn't been in the show for a long time, but he was very important early on. I I love this fucking dude's whole deal. This is also a character that is in Super Robot Wars, but is also one that I'd never heard the voice. And the voice was very surprising to me. He's voiced by Horebe Ryuichi. And I was looking at this guy with the fucking big beard and the long flowing hair and this huge red jacket and the sunglasses. I was expecting this like super deep, intense voice, something a little bit more like a Hayami Show or like a Ginga Banjo kind of guy. But instead, Horebe Ryuichi has this very kind of understated, I think very menacing quality to his voice, where in those early appearances where, Amandra is kind of basically manipulating everything that Daba does. It's just a very interesting character. He's very enigmatic. I know we're going to get more with this guy because the stuff from Super Robot Wars has not even really popped up yet with him.
Good, because I was going to say, I want more of him. He's so cool.
Yes. Yeah, I know he's going to come back again later because he's just like, he's fucking awesome. And it's a character I love the design of, but when I saw him in the show, I was like, oh, this is a different character than I was expecting. And the way they execute on him is even more interesting than the way he was presented in Super Robot Wars.
His character design is basically a cross between Quattro Bagina and Jamil Neat from Gundam X.
Yes.
And I love, although with a big beard, which neither of those guys have. And I love his design. Yeah, because he's the engine, effectively, of the early story where Daba wants to get this card they found back to this guy. Just out of his sort of like, moral purity of he's going to hand deliver it to this guy exactly. And then they wind up getting funding for the rebellion because of that. But yes, I like that character too. And I totally agree about the voice. It was not what I expected, but I loved it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see more of him because he's cool. And he's a fucking like interstellar arms dealer named Amandra Commandra with a big beard and fucking sunglasses. And like, how can you not love that?
It sounds like a name from the English dub of Speed Racer.
Yes.
That kind of name, like Inspector Detector, that kind of thing. It's Amandra Commandra. Yes. I love it. The only other character...
Yeah, he sounds like he could be on like a G.I. Joe bad guy.
Yes, yes.
Amandra Commandra.
Totally. The only other character I wanted to mention, not because of the character themselves, but because of their name. Yes, there's a character whose name is spelled C-H-A-R in English in this show. It is not anything to do with Char Aznable because it is Char. If you spell it in Japanese, it is completely different. It is a ch sound. Char is a sha, S-H sound. If you're transliterating Char correctly, it should be S-H-A-R. That is how it was done before Sunrise had done their own set of character names. Like in the original translations of the Gundam novels in the 90s, they spelled it just S-H-A. So that is a sh sound, whereas in English, CH always makes a ch, so you just have to know it's an exception. But yes, that is not a it is kind of funny when you're reading the subtitles, but Char, it is not a Char Aznable anything.
Yeah, they're pouring out for Chai Char, voiced by Shimada Bean, Takuma Shiroko in Zeta Gundam. I did think that it was one thing I liked about that kind of first half of what we're covering today is that building up of the internal backstabbing between Neimohan and Chai Char, and he thinks that he's going to win this whole battle against Stella's forces, and then ultimately he and Stella die in that final confrontation. I thought that was a particularly great episode, and it's one of the show doesn't do a lot of bigger story arcs. That's one of the most major ones, and I thought that whole sequence where he dies and Neimohan just looks on and kind of laughs at him for being a fool, whose ambitions got ahead of him. It was just a really great moment.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so do you want to go ahead and go through? You've broken up the show into, I think, 4 arcs here that we could kind of do to talk about any individual episodes or things we want to mention in there.
Yeah. So I just broke it up based on basically the setting,
right.
With the last one being sort of, we're only part through the Tridatoire. Do you want me to read the story arc descriptions as well?
If you would like to.
Sure. So their first arc here is episodes 1 to 6, the Koam arc. Daba has an encounter with a group of bandits and decides to complete a dying man's request to return a mysterious banking card to war profiteer Amandra Commandra. On the way, he attracts the interest of the bandit Fenelia Amu and the fairy-like Mirari named Lilith Fao. I had to look up what their species was called because I had no idea. As well as encountering the opportunistic Gavlet Gavle. Amandra gains an interest in Daba and his ragtag gang and decides to test them as he leaves to planet Mizun. Daba and the gang steal a ship and pursue him, but Gavlet joins the Posaydal army under Chai Char with a promise to stop Daba in order to rise through the ranks.
This show hits the ground running. These first 6 are so good. It just, it kind of knows what it wants to be right off the bat. Obviously, there's going to be some maybe adjustment or tinkering in terms of how much the world building is front and center in later episodes, but everything here is very consistent with what we get later. I think it is so good at introducing these characters, setting up pins, knocking them down in terms of how everyone sort of gets together, how we learn about the world. It still has the Tomino quality of we hit the ground running with that exposition, and we do not learn Daba's whole backstory at the beginning. We kind of, in fact, we never all learn it all in one place, really. We kind of get it doled out bit by bit over the course of these sort of first of the first core, but it's just a very confident beginning. It's very fun right off the bat. I think its sense of tone is dialed in so well, where it is comedic, but it also isn't as cartoony as Zabungle. It has that kind of more Star Wars kind of pulp quality, I think is what you would call it, and I just enjoyed it right off the bat.
Yeah. And I think the first episode, titled Dreamers, is particularly fantastic. And the introduction to Daba, who's asleep on the carrier or whatever, where the L-Gaim is, and Qiao gets tricked by Amu. And then you have an absolutely fucking crazy moment in the first episode where he gets into the lightsaber duel with the bandit Lilin and cuts her fucking hand off.
Yes.
Holy shit. And the show never gets to that part again. That kind of graphic. It's not bloody, but they show him cut her fucking hand off. And you could tell this is post-Empire Strikes Back.
Yes.
Because they completely rip off everything about the scene where she gets a robot hand and they're testing it and stuff. And it's just that scene from Empire. And I was glad that I was okay, right, this is post-Empire. Yes, they'll give her a robot hand, because I'm it would be pretty gnarly to introduce your hero character to a show like this, where he's just lopping people's limbs off. Is pretty fucked up.
It's pretty great. I do like that later on when we get the episode about Lilin's daughter, Daba is correct in telling her, "I did not kill your mom," because he didn't. He does conveniently leave out the "I did cut her fucking hand off," though.
Yes. It's pretty hardcore. But yeah, that whole introduction to Daba is fucking crazy. It is very cool. And it's one of those things where he just feels very mysterious right off the bat. And he's just kind of got control of this whole weird situation. But I also like the kind of the first 6 to 7 show episodes. It kind of goes into the early parts of the next arc, where Daba is very reluctant to kill people. And he's the whole kind of, inciting action of the show is this guy who Daba did not want to kill and who kind of gets caught up in the crossfire of this big battle, giving him this mysterious kind of credit card thing that has all this money and telling him as a dying wish, take this to Kamandra, and Daba goes to fulfill that request. And it's such an interesting place to start with our hero, because I think we see later that Daba clearly was already heading on a quest to go fight against Posaydal. And this kind of is actually what we see as the inciting incident is actually a detour for him that ultimately will lead him back to his home planet, where he starts the resistance properly. But I think that kind of evolution of his morality, where he's so resistant to killing people in the first few episodes to the point where he's fulfilling a total stranger's dying request, a total stranger who is part of a group that are actively trying to kill him.
Yes.
I don't think Daba has much of a moral imperative to follow through on this request. And I do think you see, as it goes on, you have a little bit in those early episodes of them deliberately showing things like people jumping out of the heavy metals. You've got some stuff that's a little bit like Zabungle, of him holding the heavy metal and just yelling get out or I'm going to blow this thing up. And he stops doing that at a certain point. And I think it's an interesting kind of shift where at a certain point it's a proper war against Posaydal. It's not some random bandits, and he stops pulling his punches eventually, and I think it's a cool development you see over the course of that first arc.
I also like how the whole thing with the, million, it's not Zenny. My mind goes to what is your fake anime currency? And I go to Zenny because of Dragon Ball, but it's your million Gin, yeah. The million Gin card. I love how Daba uses it throughout this opening arc as a way to trick people. So most notably it's with Lilith, where he meets Lilith, who's trapped by a circus and forced to perform, And so what he does is he trades the card for Lilith and then immediately goes back in and has Lilith help him steal it back. But he does that throughout, and like Cal keeps having to tell him, like, you really want to like do this? He says, we're just going to steal it back. He's like, it's fine. And I just love that he's so, on the one hand, he does have this moral imperative if he's going to return the card, but also he is totally fine with tricking people and ripping them off with it while never actually letting it go. But it shows how cunning he is, because he keeps coming up with schemes around it that kind of give us a sense of, because there's no real military strategy yet to speak of because they don't have a military behind them, but you get it through the card, and that's very fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very interesting way that is a dynamic element early in the show. All right. So then we have what I call the Mizun arc, which is the biggest section of this area of the show. It's episodes 7 to 16. So Daba encounters Gao Haleshi, one of Posaydal's extra 13, on his stolen ship. Daba's charisma and the pettiness of the Posaydal army ultimately cause Leshy's loyalties to falter. She assists Daba in landing on Mizun and ultimately chooses to join his team. Daba encounters a revolutionary army on Mizun led by Stella Koban, a former member of the local aristocracy which were overthrown by Posaydal. Stella helps Daba find Amandra, and after correcting Amandra, because Daba just punches the shit out of that dude when he first meets him, which is great, Daba finally commits to fighting against Posaydal by joining Stella's force. Daba is the lost prince of the Yarman people, a group native to Mizun who were eradicated by Posaydal out of fear of their power, and the L-Gaim uses Yarman technology like the spiral flow cockpit. Tensions are severe within the group as Stella fears Daba's charisma, many are suspicious of Leslie's allegiances, and they constantly fight off attacks from Ne Mohan, a member of the Extra 13, and Gable, who has fallen under her command. Daba learns that Oldna Posaydal's ship will be passing by Mizun, and he commandeers one of Stella's ships to go and finally confront Posaydal herself. He discovers that she is a strange, ethereal woman with an almost metallic visage. Posaydal tells Daba that she conforms to the natural laws of Pentagona. She asserts that she is a child of God who will teach humanity to heal the world under an absolute dictatorship. She offers Daba to join her, but he refuses and escapes. Shortly after returning to Mizun, Stella is wounded in a battle, and Daba takes de facto command of the rebels. Chai-Char forces a final battle, attempting to show his superiority to Ne Mohan, and in the resulting battle, both Chai-Char and Stella are killed.
Lots and lots of stuff going on here. I think this is the best stretch of the show so far. It is just so dense with greats, although I really like what comes afterwards too. But there's so many great things that go on in this stretch. One thing I want to talk about right now, because you mentioned the whole spiral flow cockpit idea and all that stuff. One of my favorite things, the whole way the L-Gaim, he's got the like bike thing that comes out of it that he flies around on, and then he docks inside the L-Gaim, and when he is piloting it, it's almost like he's in like what today you would see as like a VR environment in an arcade or something, where he's on this thing that moves 360 degrees. Actually, you know what it's very clearly inspired by is the turrets on the Millennium Falcon in Star Wars, is that kind of like space where you're in this like 360 degree movement, and that leads them to even introducing the 360 degree like mirror cockpit idea that you are a glass like cockpit idea that you will get in Zeta Gundam. And I'm actually kind of curious if that idea was come up with for this and then put into Zeta Gundam, or it's something they were thinking about for Zeta Gundam and then worked into this as they were working on it. It's fascinating, but you get that here. And that whole element is not part of the story. It's of this aspect of the arc, but I did just want to mention it's one of the things that makes the L-Gaim one of my favorite mechs I've ever seen.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that 360 cockpit thing is an element designed by Nagano Mamoru that they then pull forward to Zeta, and all of the later Universal Century Gundams all use that kind of free-flowing 360-degree, three-dimensional cockpit, which I think is like, it is, one, a very cool design, but it just gives the animators so much that they can do with it. And so like specifically for the medium of animation, I think it's like was a really big innovation. I also think that the spiral flow thing is a partial reference to Riding the Brave, because in that show, the main character Akira always has to get into Riding the Brave by jumping his motorcycle off of a conveniently placed ramp that's always somewhere near where the fight is, and gets absorbed into Riding the Brave. I've only seen a few episodes of that show, but that's also in Super Robot Wars, and it's just like the coolest thing ever. It's like, let me just like constantly fucking wheelie and ramp off a fucking thing to get up into my giant robot. But this is like clearly like a similar sort of idea, intentionally or otherwise. It's pulling that, and I do think I love the idea of your cool space hover bike that also is your cockpit. Is fucking awesome.
And then in terms of other stuff that happens in the story here, I mean, I think it's episode 6 where we go to space for the first time, and I know that because episode 5 ends with next stage, the space.
Yes.
We're going to the space. But anyway, I think I hadn't realized how much I missed Tomino Space episodes until we got to that one, because we went 100 solid episodes, Sean, between Zabungle and Dunbine with no outer space. And it is, look, Tomino, you put him and his character's on a ship in space, and he just does some good fucking stuff. I wrote in my notes, space battle time, 3 exclamation points. We're so fucking back, which just is how it felt there. So far, L-Gaim mainly takes place on planets, although there is the stretch where we are in space after the Mizun stuff. But it is still fun to be back there. And then once you get to Mizun and you get a lot of the lore around Daba and everything, it's really good. The way, even though this is a light-hearted show in a lot of ways, when you get to Mizun and you see what happened to the Yarman, it's such vivid imagery of like a burned out genocidal space that like obviously it's impossible not to connect it to stuff like images out of Gaza if you're watching it today. But obviously there's, horribly for humanity, there's something like this going on at all times in the world. And it is just like very stark. And it's one of those things that gives Daba some depth because, again, as lighthearted as the show can be around him, he is coming from this place of having had this horrible stuff happen to his people and this planet and seen what Posaydal will do. And so there is this like very stark, deeply felt evil in the world that is established here.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think this Mizun arc is really well done overall. I think it does the best job of kind of balancing the episodic stuff with those kind of bigger plot elements like, the early episodes where you see what happened to the people of Mizun, you see what happened to the people of Yarman, and you see how the oppressive nature of Posaydal's rule continues to affect things, where you have that one guy who's the older member of Stella's unit who starts to suspect that Daba is a member of the Yarmans and starts to shout that out. And Daba, you see that kind of like the sort of like racial bias that basically ends up existing as a result of the fear of people being associated with the Yarmans and what Posaydal will do if you are. And how that affects people who otherwise would see them as great allies, right, are so afraid by the potential consequences that they become effectively racist. And I think that dynamic is really interesting. The other element of this arc, with specifically like Mizun, that I love is Stella Koban and like his whole element as a character, which is feels like a much more serious version of the guy we had in Zabungle, who was the sort of more or less leader of the organization Assault, who ends up being mostly incompetent, that Jiren and all the rest have to deal with. But Stella is a much more effective leader, but he also is like the wrong guy to be the leader. And I love the tensions that build between him and Daba, where Stella's whole thing is that he was a member of the ruling class that were displaced by Posaydal, and he wants to reinstate the old order where he was on top. He doesn't really want a true revolution that brings a broader sense of equality. But because he still has all of this wealth, he's using that wealth as a way to fuel the revolution rather than using ideology and like charisma and belief and faith to do it, which is what Daba brings, right? Everyone looks at Daba, they see him lead by example. He's the one at the front lines. He's the one giving the like powerful speeches. He's the one with like the moral clarity and strength of heart to see things through that inspires everyone. When Stella needs people to go on missions, he literally like opens up his wallet and starts throwing gold coins at people, and it makes Daba very upset. And I just think that dynamic is really fascinating in having your kind of revolutionary leader be not so much of a revolutionary. And you want Stella as an ally because he's got the resources, but also it's so clear that in the long term he never could have been a leader of that organization, and any rebellion led by him was doomed to fail eventually.
It's kind of a different version, and it's a little more serious of a version of the arc in Zabungle, where you have the Salt leader, who is sort of bumbling buffoon. In this case, it's more pointed because of, as you say, the economic side of it, of him just literally throwing money at people, which is not how this is ever going to work. And it's almost like Daba is so offended by how this guy, Stella, is doing all of this, that's what really pushes him to like embrace this revolutionary leader thing he winds up doing.
Yes. The other part in this stretch of episodes, that this might be my favorite episode in the whole show, is I want to say it's episode 14. Yeah, Lady Posaydal, which is where he goes into space and says, fuck it. I know it's only episode 14 of like a 54 episode show, but I want to see what this Posaydal thing is all about, and encounters Oldna Posaydal herself. And that sequence where he's on the spiral flow hover bike and he's in her room and it turns into like a fucking hologram, like a hollow room basically. And so it's him just like in space. And then you see Oldna Posaydal, which I just think is one of the best character designs of the show. Like, it's such an interesting looking character, with her big metallic hair. That in Super Robot Wars, I've seen this character design before, but only as a 2D image. I'd never seen her animated. And I find it really interesting the way they animate her hair, where it still has this very metallic sheen and appearance to it, but it has more of a flowing hair-like appearance than I kind of expected. She's got these crazy eyes that are these kind of like cybernetic eyes that have these weird lines that run across the top of them. And she just gives this sort of very classic bad guy mastermind thing of this whole speech about her, the nature of her control, that she's conforming to the system of the Pentagona World, that her imposing this kind of dictatorial authority over everything is the only thing that will bring any kind of lasting peace. And when left to their own devices, people will just devolve into conflict and violence and war. And then she tries to invite Daba over. And there's this sense that she has known the whole time what Daba is, where he is, that she has kind of deliberately allowed her ship to go very close to Mizun to create this opportunity that she thought Daba would take to confront her. And I just find that whole sequence so interesting. Oldna Posaydal, voiced by Shimazu Saiko, who's Yuri in Dirty Pair, Rag in Zabungle, giving obviously a very different kind of performance here. And I just think the whole aesthetic of there's like a shot that has that kind of 3D quality you're talking about earlier, where Daba is spinning around and firing lasers at her, and she's in the distance and spinning, and she has this almost ghost-like appearance because she's just floating in space with her big cloak and her crazy big spindly metal shoulder pads. We've only seen Posaydal twice. We see her in this episode. We see her very briefly in the episode on Gust Gal, where Daba bum rushes her statue to blow it up. But at the two times we've seen her, I just think that character is very intriguing. And just aesthetically, the show goes kind of wild when she shows up, and I think it's fucking cool.
Couldn't agree more. I love this whole episode and this. It's also just an amazingly animated episode all around. Like, the L-Gaim is just hyper detailed throughout this episode. It looks more like a movie. Like, they clearly set aside some extra time to do the animation on this one. There's this one shot where there's this amazing bespoke animation of its hand flipping the lightsaber around, and it's like this close-up, stuff like that. But yeah, that encounter with Posaydal, I took note of because that is exactly what I said Zambot 3 needed to have done. Because if you'll remember, Zambot has, your main character effectively meet God at the very middle of the last episode of the entire show and give this whole twist about like what their goal was and all this stuff. But it's too late for that to mean anything in the story. It's similar to what he did with Triton of the Sea, where Tomino was like, surprise genocide ending, basically, kind of thing. And instead, we get that this is exactly where you need this kind of scene, which is like end of the first core, earlier in the show, enough time that you've kind of got a sense of the status quo and of our main character, that you can then have Posaydal come in and kind of knock down a bunch of our assumptions about what she is, what her goals are. There's this, like, she says she's a child of God, that her goal is to heal the world, not to enslave it, all of this stuff. So you have this big question of what is she? But then also, the show has enough time to go to build on that idea. And we haven't, from where we are, we haven't necessarily seen how it's going to resolve all of that. But this is the right place to put that kind of scene. And this is where you can kind of see how much Tomino has grown as an artist, of knowing where to drop his, like, big twist villain scene.
Yes. Yeah. And just making that big twist villain rad.
Yes,
Like she
rad
should be
as
on
shit.
the cover of like a sick heavy metal album, you know?
Yes.
It's just fucking awesome.
Yeah. And as you noted earlier, you also have all the stuff with Kiao in this stretch that is really, really good. This is where Leshy is introduced and then becomes part of the crew. There are some really good episodes building up to like her turn. Episode 7, which is the first in this stretch you've outlined, has one of the best fights of the series, which is Daba and Gavle fighting over the ocean. And it kind of reminds me of the climax of Mobile Suit Gundam Hathaway, the first movie, where you have mechs over water with a lot of aerial strategy as they're coming in low and then coming back up. But mixed with that is Leshy debating whether or not she's going to fire her ship at Daba. And she has all this like internalized imagery of almost like angel and devil on her shoulder as she debates what to do. And so like that more than anything is the scene that sold me on Leshy as a character and as someone who was going to sort of turn heel on the villains and become one of the heroes, because that episode is so good.
Yes, because that's kind of like it's your like atmospheric reentry almost kind of episode in a Gundam show. You know, yeah, they're like coming in super hot and having to deal with landing. Yeah. I mean, throughout the show, the action is just absolutely phenomenal. All right, let's then talk about the space arc, which is a little bit smaller, kind of 6-episode arc following that. With Stella's death, the rebellion begins to falter and everyone begins fleeing from Mizun. Leshy tricks Amu into splitting up as she sneaks away with Daba and Kiao escaping into space. They end up at the Thart Star, a paradise city built out of a meteor where only women live and is managed by the enigmatic Full Flat. Meanwhile, Gavlet gets command of his own ship, which is managed by a staff of women. He is given a mission by Giwaza, leader of the Extra 13, to become a headhunter and hunt down the remaining rebels. Full Flat offers Daba to stay at Thart Star and warns him that his intense feelings of justice will destroy him. Daba chooses to leave and decides to rush Gustgal, the capital world of Posaydal's forces, to try and strike at Posaydal's heart. They destroy a massive statue of Posaydal and are nearly shot down when Amu arrives with the ship and helps them escape. Daba and his crew liberate a mining city built out of a meteor, but tensions with Hashimosha, one of Amu's old crew, leads to a series of skirmishes with Gable and Nemohan when Hasha betrays them. Running out of supplies, Daba and crew stumble across a merchant ship which is led by Kuasan Alabi, Daba's stepsister. Kuasan has no memory of Daba and is on a spy mission to eradicate the last of the Yarmen. Daba barely escapes with the help of the ship's crew, who are refugees from Koam, and Daba sees that there's a glimmer of the real Kuasan, but Gable's interference prevents Daba from reaching her.
Good set of episodes, and I think this is where the show becomes more episodic and less focused on kind of the broader sort of like macro scenarios of the world. But the thing is, I think these episodes are really fucking good. Like, there's just a lot of really good ones in here, particularly the one with Olabi that you mentioned at the end. I think the next stretch is even better as we get into some of the Treatator stuff. But there are just some really like standout episodes in all of this.
Yeah, I think in particular, it's episode 18, which is called Gustagal Demo. That's like, most of my description is that episode. Like, that's one where I looked back and I'm like, you mean all of this? Like, so basically everything that happens at Thart Star and all the stuff of them going to Gustagal and blowing up the statue is just one episode. It's like kind of fucking crazy because it feels like it's 2 or 3 episodes worth of stuff in one. But yeah, like all that stuff is awesome. Full Flat, we've only seen her a little bit, but she's fucking cool. Like, it's one great name for a character. She's voiced by Doi Mika, who was Marvel Frozen in Dunbine. And you get this kind of interesting, like kind of pairing where it's been at that point a good like 5 or 6 episodes since he met Posaydal, and Full Flat kind of has a similar thing that she offers to Daba, where she's like, come live with us here in paradise and you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. And he ultimately refuses. And that's when she has this line about like those emotions or those feelings will ultimately destroy you. And he runs off. I kind of find it, there's an almost kind of like the Odyssey kind of mythological quality to this idea that we like stumble upon this weird paradise island full of women, and like you're given this like sort of, you know, hero's journey-esque choice to kind of go back and to like stay here and to let go of this larger world that exists out there, and Daba has to refuse that temptation and run out. And just the way that the Thart Star, like the design of that whole place and the art around it is fucking incredible. And then you immediately go into fucking Blade Runner or Dirty Pair, massive fucking megapolis on a alien like cybernetic world, and the way that Gustagal and that city is drawn with a massive statue of Posaydal that they blow the head off of. It's just the art is going over time on that fucking episode. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And The thing is, I think episode 18 is kind of a low point for me here of them figuring out how to do some of the episodic stuff, because I think that's too much in that episode. Like, I noted that when I watched it. It feels like too many episodes. I think there needed to be a good full Thartstar episode before they leave. Because one, it's really brief, and I think it means both halves of that episode are underserved. But it also means that Amu is gone for like half an episode before she comes back.
Yes.
And I think there needed to be at least one solid like Amu-free episode for us to feel her absence more. And it's after this one that I think the show starts getting into shape in terms of how it's going to structure episodes. So like episode 20 is the one on Palarta, where they have to go restock parts, but they wind up like instigating this sort of like worker revolt. And I think that's a really good episode. The one after that, which is just called The Tension, because all of the episode titles are in English, written in katakana. And so that one is The Tension. And that is one that is sort of about Gavlet Gabale and Nemo Han, I believe, having like some beef out in space and some stuff going on with that.
That's like the Hashimoto.
That's the Hashimoto one, sorry, yeah.
Portrays them, yeah.
Okay, that's the one I was thinking of. Sorry, but yes, that is a good one where you have Hashimoto turns heel. Episode 22 is the Kuwasan Olabi one. So I just think after that you start getting like really good, solid episodic structures where it feels a little more comfortable. 18 felt like it rushed through a little bit too much stuff for me, but after that point, I think it starts getting really good. Episode 23 or 22, by the way, the Kuwasan Olabi episode, we didn't mention the extraordinarily Twin Peaks coded moment where Daba he opens the door to Olabi and he sees this image of a naked woman in fire and then sees an impression of Posaydal hovering over Olabi, which I know this is before Twin Peaks and the bulk of David Lynch's work, but it looks like something that would just happen in an episode of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Kuwasan Olabi episode. Like, for me personally, the part I like about this stretch is episode 18, 22, and I didn't love 19, 20, 21 all that much, the more episodic ones. Like, I don't know, I like the ones that had, like, the big energy here, even if they are pretty stuffed. With the Olabi episode, I mean, it's like so much shit goes down in that episode. And yeah, I love the depiction of, we have the grand return of the Tomino character trope that we saw first in Zabungle. It's not really so much in Dunbine, but it comes back here of a woman close to the main character who is somehow psychologically manipulated or something to turn evil, which is effectively what's going on with Albie here as his sort of half-sister, stepsister. It's not actually clear to me, even having played Super Robot Wars, I don't actually know what their actual relationship is, because her name is Kuwasan. I have no idea. I have no idea what her real relationship. I hope we find out at some point. Hopefully we do, because I have a big question. Because Giri no Imoto is what they refer to her as in Japanese, which could mean a lot of things. So I'm curious to see more about that relationship, because you only get a glimpse of it. But her whole thing with, you have the Wakamoto Norio character, who we only see very briefly, but Rock Lee Ron, who's one of the extra 13, who has some crazy kung fu shit, and he just beats the shit out of Daba. One of the only times that Daba's lost a physical fight with someone. And I just think the stakes of that episode feel so incredible, because Daba's pushed to a place we've never seen him before. He's always so kind of like calm and collected, and this is the one where Olabi throws him totally off his game. He loses his shit completely, right? This is where he yells at Gabale that, I've never hated you as much as I hate you in this moment, because it all of a sudden, all of this becomes very immediate and very personal to Daba. And so it just pushes him to such an interesting place. And I love the way that that's all communicated in the story through those kind of psychedelic images of Olabi as this almost like Munch's Scream-esque figure being like tortured by Posaydal. And then you have the fantastic conclusion of that episode where you have all the refugee guys on the ship from Koam who start singing the theme of their homeland, which has been outlawed by Posaydal. And then it gets to Olabi, it cuts through something, and she starts singing it too. And it freaks the Wakamoto Norio character out when she starts doing that. Again, there's I think a lot of stuff going on there that we haven't learned in the narrative, all the ins and outs of what is happening with this character, but the setup for it is so intriguing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I really like the stretch of episodes. And actually, the next arc here, the Tridator arc, starts with, I think, my favorite episode of the show so far.
Interesting. So, yes, so the Tridatoir arc, which is Daba and crew arrive at Tridatoir, a backwater planet of Pentagona World, but one famed for its mechanical engineers. Daba deals with a spy impersonating a general named Clotho, who ultimately turns against Nemo-Han and dies in battle. Daba then encounters Miyama Asfi, the daughter of Leland the bandit who led Amu's group. Asfi is manipulated by Gabele and Hasha into believing that Daba is the target of her revenge, but Daba's honesty and moral character ultimately persuade her against getting revenge. Later, Amu encounters an old flame, Czech, who is ultimately... I love his name is Czech and not Chuck.
Yes.
But it is Czech. Czech, who is ultimately revealed to be another spy. Czech believes he's protecting Amu, but when Nemo-Han attacks Daba's base, Czech turns against Ne and is wounded in battle. And I'm just realizing I forgot to put in the 26 preview here, but episode 26, Daba gets a mysterious illness that everyone thinks is typhoid fever, which turns out to just be a cold. But in his illness, everyone is trying to get him medicine. They're betrayed by the doctor that they come against, who is also an unfortunate, weird, like, queer stereotype thing that I was not a big fan of. And they ultimately get control of the brand new heavy metal that is being designed for use for Gabele by the Tridatoir engineers using Yarmon technology. And will it become the L-Gaim Mark II? Who knows? Probably, based on next time, the real L-Gaim Mark II.
Yes. There's one thing we haven't talked about is the wonderful structuring device this show has of every episode ending with next something, next character, next heavy metal, next stage, whatever that is. There's one episode, I think it's like 21, that doesn't do that, and I got really sad, and then the next episode brought it back, and I was happy because I was worried they were going to drop it. But it is so fucking great. It is often so funny. The best one being is, I think it's episode, so 22 is the one they don't do it. It's episode 20 ends with next drama, help me! It's about the like kidnapping that's going to happen in the next one. Oh, I love that.
One of my favorite is I think it's also where they use the phrase next drama, and it's bye bye Stella.
Yes.
Because that's when he's going to die next episode, which is like an amazing way to set that up.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I love all 4 episodes we've watched so far in this stretch, 23 through 26. I think they're just really, really solid as episodes, but my favorite one is 23, and I think this might be my just favorite episode of the show so far. This is the one with General, you spelled it Clotho or Kuroso, however you want to say it, where you get there, it's a case of mistaken identity where the locals seem to assume Daba is this General Kuroso, but actually that guy is already there. But actually, that guy is a double. He is there. He has been sent by, is it Gabele or is it, no, it's Nemo-Han.
It's Nemo-Han.
That's a Nemo-Han episode, and he's a spy, and he's the real fake, because the real general was executed by Nemo-Han like months earlier. But as this episode goes, and Daba like is hanging out with this dude, the fake general starts to realize how moved he is by the rebels. Daba has this very heroic moment where he gives this guy a chance at redemption and says, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to turn you in. I just want you to keep being the general dude. Nemo-Han attacks, and Kuroso helps lead the fight against her. He winds up sacrificing himself at the end. There's this whole like motif of Daba saying like, you don't want to die alone at the end of your life having done nothing. And so when he sacrifices himself, he says, rather than die lonely, I'm going to die in front of everyone. My life will have had meaning. And then when he dies, that causes Daba to, lash out at Nemo-Han. They have a big fight. And he has this line where he says, you're not the only one who can feel pride. And the whole episode ends with Daba doing basically the end of Gundam, where he shoots straight, 90 degrees into the sky. Yes. And he says, life, you can't understand it until the very end. And that's the end of the episode. I think that is just like a perfect 22 minutes of television.
Yeah, I don't think I liked it as much as you. I did really like the episode. It didn't stand out as much. I mean, it very much this stretch of the show goes into very episodic, right? Because that one is super standalone along with the next two. And I do think it is where it starts to feel more, in some ways, kind of like Dirty Pair, where it's so standalone. It's definitely a very good episode. I
like this kind of episodic thing to begin with, and I just think it's a very good example of I like how that one it tells the story so well in this kind of like Kisho Tenketsu format, over 22 minutes. It's just very good at that. I think the Asphy one that happens after that is also just super solid in that way. And then I also think the other one of the best ones here is the Czech Sorok episode. That is the guy who was Amu's boyfriend, which is just a Dirty Pair episode. Just it's got your hunk of the week who has his history with the lead girl, who has to decide will she give up her current life to go back for this guy, and ultimately decides not to, and all of that. And I just think that one is like, couldn't be more solid in terms of doing that episodic structure. That's another Nemo Han episode, and we get her henchmen Anton and Heckler, who, this is a weird comparison, but those two guys look like if you took some of the members of the Ginyu Force, particularly Berter, and turned them into normal human beings. That is what they look like. They are like weirdly tall, proportioned dudes. But I love those guys as like our sub-baddies in that episode. And I just think that one also is just fan. It has a really good Amu story where at the end, Czech may or may not be dead, but Amu chooses to believe he's dead because then she knows she can never move backwards. It's just really good.
Yes, and you also, this is the point where you start getting the Buster launchers.
Yes.
Which are these just giant fuck-off beam rifles. Obviously, this idea will come up again in Zeta Gundam with the heavy bazooka, heavy beam bazookas, or whatever the fuck they call it, that the Yakashiki has. But these just massive beam rifles that are crazy powerful. And I love that they've communicated a design language so well, where you have these wires. It's such a great fucking detail, where when you use a beam rifle or whatever it is, you have to plug this rifle in from the weapon into the kind of belt or the kind of waist of the heavy metal, and that's what powers the rifle. And there's 3 ports, and we've only ever seen someone use 1 port. And so when this giant giant rifle pops out, they have to grab all 3 and plug all 3 in, which really communicates the idea that this is a big fucking gun.
Oh, I love that too. Yeah, the one of the best pieces of like recurring machine animation in the early stretch of the show is every time you see, it's just a repeated animation cycle they use of the L-Gaim plugging in that big fuck off rifle onto its arm and then plugging it into like its belt. It's so cool. And then they find other ways to like work with that later on, including the Buster launcher, which is, so far no one has used it effectively, but if they ever do, it will be terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great setup. This is another thing that I'm coming to it from a very Super Robot Wars perspective, because that is the, like, ultimate attack that all of these characters have in that game, is using the fucking Buster Launcher, which I have seen Daba use that maybe a million times, because I will just say, Daba is, without a doubt, the best character in that game. He's the most powerful character at the L-Gaim Mark II. It's just no doubt. And so I was very excited when the Buster Launcher popped up, and I think it's really effective to have it be so powerful that fucking nobody knows how to use it.
Yes.
And whenever someone uses it once, they're like, fuck, shit. It's like they're like, everything's blowing up. Gable's the first one to do it, and he's just like, oh my god. It's like, I can't shoot this thing again. It's like, what the hell are you engineers doing? Like, this shit is crazy.
It's also a pretty funny image in episode 25 when it's either Anton or Heckler uses it. They put it like between the like robot's legs, and it's like it's just this giant phallus that they're firing out of. There's no way to read that image other than awkwardly sexual. It's very funny.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a big rifle grenade from World War II or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just fucking a ridiculous piece of machinery. And as someone who's a big fan of it from the game, I'm very excited to see it's being given a lot of respect in the show for how fucking crazy it is, because it should be very crazy.
Episode 26, we've kind of already mentioned. It's momentous for a bunch of reasons. We get what will become the L-Gaim Mark II, which means we get our first ever 360-degree cockpit in a Tomino show, and it, as always, looks like the thing that it does is it allows Tomino to just put the characters in the environment even when they're inside the mech, and it is so dynamic for the way he likes to direct those sequences, and it just immediately you can see how it snaps right into his style. You have an amazing 4-way battle on the tarmac at the end of that episode that is another one where they just clearly saved some money and time up for this one. But most notably, episode 26 introduces a new narration for the start of the episodes that is maybe the most Tomino piece of writing of all time. It is, a single memory can grow to occupy the mind, coloring everything since perceived. That might just be humanity's sad, inescapable nature. Machines let you forget all that for a while. What a fucking... What a fucking monologue. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That last episode is fantastic, and I'm very excited to see the L-Gaim Mark II in its proper fashion. And it's a pretty interesting way to try to introduce and start the process of introducing the new mech, right? Like, we've had this is the third time we've seen this. You had it in Zabungle, where they just kind of like stumble into it when they go into the Innocent's base and they end up stealing it. Dunbine has a much bigger setup where you've got Sheila sort of like name drop the Bilbine, and then it comes in this sort of dramatic moment. Here, I think it's really interesting that you have a whole episode setting up the idea that there is a new mech. You set up that it's being made using some of the technology from the L-Gaim. I think it's really interesting, that it's not our main characters or anyone directly affiliated with the main characters that are building it. It's just a group of these engineers on this planet, and you have all that stuff with Cow basically persuading the main engineer to be like, I mean, don't you want to come over to be with us? I mean, we've got the L-Gaim, we've got the spiral flow, we got that Yarman shit, we got the good shit over here. And Posaydal and the Posaydal forces are so suspicious of the Yarman technology that they're not really letting those guys use it or looking down on them for using it. I just think that that's like such a cool, very different way to introduce your main new mecha, right? It's not we built a new one. It's not a character we know sent one to us. It is we kind of worked with this engineer to kind of steal it, but also have the people who made it come with us to remake it into our own, almost a little bit like the Gundam Mark II, where it gets repainted out of the Titans colors and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I love that idea and the whole way that's introduced. But yeah, that whole episode, it's very good, and it's a good little fitting ending and capper to where we are so far with the show.
Yes, obviously a show that doesn't have the big crazy narrative arcs like a Dunbine to give a good ending point. But it is interesting that it does feel like we end this stretch on what, to me, moving to Tridentwar and a little bit of that space arc does signal a pretty clear shift in the structure of the show. And we'll see if it how long it sticks with that or if it's long term, of being more standalone than it had been. It was always a fairly episodic show. But you definitely, the Mizun arc has a much clearer sense of here's Stella Koban, here's like what's going on this planet, and introduces that from that first episode and follows it through. And then we've moved into this kind of very different mode for the show that I'm curious to see where it goes, how it hits up with the main plot, what the fuck is going on with Kwasan Allaby. I've got all these weird pieces of information from this game I played, but I do not at all have like a clear vision of the bigger picture of what's going on. So I'm very curious to see how all these little pieces, Amandra Commandra, Oldna Posaydal, Full Flat, Kwasan Allaby, these characters we've seen bits and pieces of that clearly are meant to be important, but we've only seen them in brief snippets.
Right. Do you want to end? Do you want to talk any more about any of the heavy metals? And just how fucking great these designs are before we break.
Yes, yeah, because I did pull in, there's a great Sunrise website that it just has all the L-Gaim stuff. It's all in Japanese, but it's got great screenshots for all this stuff.
It's got like the original character design drawings that look really good.
Yes.
And clean.
Yes, and I've already talked a lot about the OJ or the Alga, however you want to pronounce it, Daimohans. The other favorite heavy metal is the Bashu,
yes.
Or the Batshu.
Yes.
Which is has only been used a little bit. It kind of came back in these most recent couple of episodes, but there was a bit there where it kind of went away because it was Gable's for a few episodes, and then he gets the Ashura Temple, which is also great. But the Bashu, which is this big, like, sort of really dark purple with these sort of magenta highlights. This is the first one that uses the Buster Launcher as well, which is when it kind of comes back. It has such a menacing head in appearance. One of the things I love about the heavy metals is how kind of like thin and gangly they are, and where you get those little gaps where you see the machinery underneath. And the Bashu is a really great example of that, where it is not this sort of like big bulky thing, but it feels like it's as light as it can be to give it as much maneuverability as possible. And yeah, that in its color scheme, I just think this one's really fucking cool.
Yeah, the Bashu is probably my favorite, other than just the L-Gaim itself. Like, I don't want to overlook how good the L-Gaim design is, and how strikingly good it is for being just all white. It does not have other colors on it other than like the darker browns of the like metal underneath it. But it is so good within that zone. I think the way it is, as you were saying, it has that ganglier look, the really long legs. It's just got so much personality. I think it looks particularly good in motion and everything it's able to do with that. It's really one of the best like hero, lead mechs in any show I've ever seen.
Yeah, and I love the little element of it has those two sort of panels on the side that flip up for the boosters, which to me is like one of those design elements that is very influential because you see stuff like that on so many mechs. Like that's like so many Gundams. They don't have little panels, but have those little kind of booster things on the side. The Gundam Mark II has that, and it's just a great element of the L-Gaim's design. Some other ones, you've got the Dizard, which is the kind of like mass-produced L-Gaim that Leshy mostly uses. That's red colored, and she'll get a better one later that is even cooler.
The Dizard, which they can't figure out how to fucking spell in English because it's on the official Sunrise site. It's D-SEERD. In the really bad subtitles I had, it was like DSSRD, just like it had no vowels. But the way it's spelled in Japanese and katakana, it's basically the word dessert, but with a do at the end instead of a to. It's just desado. And so, like, I don't know why it is spelled so weird, but it is a great heavy metal.
Yes. You also have the Ashura Temple, which is what Gable's mostly been using for the last 10 episodes or so. That one is pretty sick. It's, it's got your kind of Char custom Zaku coloring with the pink and the darker red highlights. But the best thing about the Ashura Temple is it has these two kind of like extra arms around the back that have these big shields with a spike in the middle that is a laser gun. And the way that is used in the action scenes is awesome. And when Gable comes roaring out with the Ashura Temple the first time he gets one, I think that fight scene is really fantastic. It uses those really well. That's also when he's piloting the Kuwasan Albi episode, and the way they use that in that fight with that really desperate fight that Daba has. Like that one I think is also particularly cool.
Absolutely. I like the Ball Bud. I like the Alone. I like the Greya. The Greya looks a lot like something out of Vodums with its like big mono eye that looks kind of bulbous. But those are some of the like kind of grunt suits you get from the enemies.
Yes. Yeah, one thing I do think is funny is that you do have this sort of notion of these different classes of heavy metals. But as far as I know, there's only two. There's B-class heavy metals and A-class. And the Alon and the Greya are the B-class ones. And those are your sort of like everyday, like, and actually the Balbud also is a B-class. And those are just sort of like schmuck suits, whoever, your grunts pilot those. And then everything else is in A-class heavy metal. And it's like, I find it funny that there's not like C classes and stuff like that. There's not a whole lot of differentiation. But yeah, I do like the Vodum Z kind of look of the Alon and the Greya, that they are like very clearly these kind of workhorse machines that you have not had a lot of love put into them. You put those next to like the Auge, and that's a very big world of difference within the class of heavy metals.
It's kind of funny, Sean. Back when we did Weekly Suit Gundam, at the end of every year, we would rank all the mobile suits that we met that year. If we were to do that at the end of this season, like Season 6, Part 1, at the end of L-Gaim, that list would just entirely be mechs from this show and Gundam. There's some good mechs in some of the other shows. None of them would make the cut. It's this show and it's Gundam, and it is amazing just what a cut above those two are versus the other Tomino shows so far.
Yeah, I think maybe like the VRS for Dunbine in the Dunbine itself it can be, are a little competitive, and the Leprechaun's also pretty cool. But it's not like with L-Gaim, it's just everyone that comes in.
Yes,
you're like, oh my god. I just remember so distinctly when the Bashu comes in at the end of the previous episode. It's like, next heavy metal, Bashu, and this thing comes on. You're like, oh my god. Because I don't think this one is in Super Robot Wars. If it is, I don't remember it. But when that popped up, I'm like, holy shit, that thing is so cool. Oh my god. And yeah, like every time they pop up, I'm just like, these are the coolest. Nagano Mamoru, turns out, he's pretty good. It turns out he's pretty good even when he was a fucking kid, basically. He could draw the shit out of this stuff.
Yep. And I'm excited just looking at this page on Sunrise of the heavy metals we have yet to meet, to watch more of this show. We've got 28 episodes left, episodes 27 through the end, episode 54, and I'm excited to go watch more because this show is a blast.
Yes, this show is fucking awesome. I'm very, very excited. I'm very excited to hear if the wind has a reply for me. We've got a whole other theme song, and who knows if it will reply or not. But we've got a whole lot of more L-Gaim next time on Japanimation Station.
Not